All right, we're live.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Bevry Community's weekly podcast on, we've been going through John Vervaake's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis YouTube series. So we've been doing this for quite some time. We're starting to get into the home stretch, I think, as we're getting into episodes 33 and 34 of a 50 episode series. So I'd like to welcome John Buck is here, but I think he stepped away for a little bit, but he'll be coming back. And we've got Nick and Tyler here as well. So say hi, everyone. Hello. So and Submit may be joining us later. So we're getting into, I think, these episodes where Vervaeke is really starting to bring it home, and I think moving towards his final push, which I think is that is the religion that's not a religion. But this is the episode where he talks really about spirituality and this term, which I think he coined, called Religio, which he sort of relates to the same roots as religion. So it's some real interesting stuff here, and maybe controversial. Well, I'm curious, as you know, I'm a non-theist. We've got some theists. I'm curious to see how our discussion goes in whether you guys buy Vervaeke's sort of secular spiritualism that he sets out in these episodes. I don't know how we want to go through it. I mean, we can sort of. He fits a lot into this episode 33. I mean, I know I had to stop every few minutes just to take it in. But he basically presents this phenomenology of relevance realization. He sets out a diagram where he talks about, on the left side of the diagram, what feeds into relevance realization is problem solving, insight, categorization, something called demonstrative reference, which I haven't quite figured out what he means by that. Consciousness, working memory, inference, and communication. So these are all, I guess, subsystems that feed into relevance realization. And then, does anyone want to say anything about the left-hand side of the? I mean, his main focus is on the right-hand side of his diagram, which I guess we could see if I can figure out in a few minutes while someone else is talking to see if I can put it up on the screen. But he talks about that, this side of the diagram, it's about the self-organizing criticality, these small, this complexification, this capacity for transcendence. He talks about that it produces emergent functions, that there's a connectedness to something greater. I'm just going through this, either the phenomenology of relevance realization. So there's a creation of affordances that, anyway, I think I'm getting too much into the weeds on this, but I'll put up in a few minutes his diagram. But he goes on to his right side of his diagram, which he's talking about the one second, okay, so he talks about relevance realization. He calls pre-experiential. He says that for a meaningfully structured experience, the level of common sense obviousness is a result of relevance realization. It's not generated by it. It's not generated by the common sense, by the level of common sense obvious meaningness of meaningful world. That the world is generated out of relevance realization coupled to the environment. And I'll just pause on this one. When he calls it pre-experiential, I have a bit of an issue with this, and I think, I'm not sure if it's just he's using experiential in a very particular way. He seems to describe it as meaningfully structured experience, level of common sense obviousness, but that seems to me a little post-experiential. I mean, experiential to me seems to be, consciousness, having an experience, having an awareness of something. And I don't know how you can call relevance realization pre-experiential, because you have to have the experience to consider it relevant. At least like a fraction of a second before, you have to experience it, then figure out that it's relevant, rather than
I would
the other way around.
agree. And I think it's interesting because he kind of brings up this diagram of things having this kind of mutualistic effect on each other in many other places in the lecture series, right? The one he uses initially is cat spelled weird, or with the letters distorted, and we can recognize it even though we couldn't recognize the individual letters that made it up. I think it pushing his definition closer towards something like that, where relevance realization and the experiential, pre-sense making are having this type of relationship that are, kind of interpenetrating and affecting each other. But I agree, it seems very strange to me to pose it in the sense of it being pre-experiential, unless he is using a very bizarre
like I get saying it's pre-meaningful structured experience.
I would agree.
That makes sense. But then why are you what I don't know if this is important to, he seemed to think it was sort of key that it's pre-experiential. Now, if he meant it literally, then I think there's a problem here. But if he meant it mainly
hold on, let me step in for a second. So when we say it is not pre-experiential, we mean then that it is experiential, right?
Well, that it's that you require the experience first before you can.
I'm just making
relevance.
sure. So you are saying it's experiential.
That it uses experience. If that's what you mean, then yes.
Well, right. So then, not that it uses experience, so that it is experiential.
That it depends on that it's an aspect.
I would say yes to that statement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Remember, he's trying to build a theory of consciousness, and so if it's relying upon there already being some sort of a way to have experience, it wouldn't really make sense as a theory of consciousness. Like bringing back to Kant, like the structure is what we're using in order to even have an experience in the first place. I think that's what he's meaning by it being pre-experiential.
Exactly right. So the question is, even then, that's the direct explanation for it. But even then, so if it is part of the experience, what is it then that you can experience of this aspect of it? And then when you examine it from that perspective, anything that you discuss as an experience is going to be this as an aspect, as a phenomenon within this relevance realization process, but it's not actually going to be the thing that he's discussing itself. And that's just a design of the fact of the way that he's discussing it, right? It's not even like really, I guess, any kind of like mysterious property of it. It's just the manner. It's just by the nature of how it is, right?
Well, but he says a minute later, he says like it's pre-experiential. There's a fundamental grounding of being and being connected, and he says that's the same thing. Like he seemed to really require it to be sort of pre-experiential.
That is, yeah, there's a bit of a conundrum, right? It's like the classic kind of paradox of dependent origination, right? Well, like the classic example, like what came first, the chicken or the egg? But you get these like temporal issues that arise, or like the bee and the flower, which one came first, right?
Right, exactly. Well, there's a reason why. So let's wind the clock back, all of us. So there's a reason why consciousness itself is grounded in a kind of foggy, mystical, whatever thing in the back, right? Because let's go back, pre-experiential, guys. Let's go back. Let's wind our consciousness back literally to pre-experiential. Okay, let's do it. You at some point X, you're going to get to a point where you are not experiencing things. There was a physical state that was occurring at that point, which is pre-experiential. Okay. And you can do that at any point. I'm just saying, like, that is from from a historical perspective, that's just a truth and of the nature of what it is to be coming into conscious awareness with a historical narrative of the cosmos behind you that you had no real impact on. Right. There's a pre-experiential aspect to the physical structure of the way that we see things. And that like John said, that's ultimately what it comes down to, I think, is that the physical structure you inherit as kind of the combined properties of your ancestral history, right? You can think of it like that, especially from an evolutionary perspective, that the whole long historical narrative, the great kind of Ouroboros worm that extends past into eternity, is your inheritance that you kind of get dropped into.
Okay, but where does relevance realization fit into that? Which is what he's talking about here. You know.
Well, that's a crazy idea that I think that he's trying to explain over 50. Like it's really, over 50 episodes, but it's really just him trying to grapple with consciousness and the nature of being a conscious creature, I think. And yeah, so
but that's the point. I think consciousness has to be a more fundamental grounding than relevance realization. Like, even if it's just a half step behind. First of all, you can have, presumably we can have experience without relevance realization. So the conscious experience has to come first, and has to be more fundamental. I mean, if we want if integrated information theory is correct, pre-consciousness would be unintegrated information, and when the information gets integrated, it suddenly manifests as consciousness. And relevance realization, I guess, John and I were talking about this offline. Could you have some unconscious? Can you have unconscious relevance realization? I think you'd have to have, for it to be pre-experiential, you'd have to say you can have unconscious relevance realization, which I'm not sure you can. Can you realize relevance seems to require.
Well, hold on a second. Wait,
conscious.
hold on a second. When you were just speaking, where were those words coming from?
Oh yeah, no, I like, this is I say this. John will recognize this. I say this myself. In terms of free will, like, we don't know where they're coming from necessarily. We don't have access to where they're coming from.
Was it pre-experiential? Did you experience the location from where the information
and that I would say would be pre-experiential, but would it
exactly
would that be relevance realization?
Yeah, yes, exactly. Any processes, any cognitive functions at all, period, are necessarily being enacted by physical structures in the world. The specific tracing of the physical interaction of these things doing the things that they're doing in our headspace defines that cognitive state.
I was just listening to the happiness hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt, and he brings up these tests where you'll do you'll input a word on a screen for people, and then kind of track how much time before they'll say they had a negative or positive valence to the word. So if it's like something like courage, that'll have a positive valence. If it's something like fear, that'll have a negative valence. What they'll do is they'll do a subliminal instance of a negative type of word like fear before another word, say like strawberries or something like that. And they'll react, it'll take them a little bit longer before they'll actually say, oh, this is a positive thing. Or maybe if it was, say, a more neutral thing, they'll more likely choose it to be a negative thing, indicating that there is subliminal relevance realization, I guess, taking place that is pre-experiential, or at least non-consciously experienced.
But I'm not sure the answer to this, because we're just sort of thinking it through. But can we say that it's relevant to us? Like, is it possible that our brain does it, but it's not relevant to us until we realize its relevance? And I'm using realize.
No, that's exactly it. No, that's perfect. That's exactly what he's talking about. That's exactly it. And the fact that you can alter what is relevant to you is the kind of exaptation process that we'll get to, I guess, at some point, or we can bring it now, whatever. But you have the capacity as a conscious creature to kind of alter where your awareness is and what is relevant. you're not limited strictly by like state zero, right? Like state now. You actually get to play around in this kind of this space where you alter the trajectory of things, where you alter your attention. It's like your gaze, where it's locked onto the fovea, like the thing, the focus, the thing that you're interested in. That's your left hemisphere, right? And I want to bring this up is like in the very beginning of this conversation, just something to pull back to if we need. But I think it's very important, and I think it's directly relevant to what he's discussing, right? That this hemispherical relationship and the way that the brain processes information is directly tied to it's these essential concepts that he's discussing, right? And especially religio, as we get into this, especially the kind of numinous interconnectedness of the exterior world, which is what you find being processed in the right hemisphere, right? Like,
so is that a adequate way, maybe, Brett, for understanding his point? Like, even if it's not exactly maybe what he was meaning by pre-experiential, at least you can kind of tell from like the different psychological experiments that there is some sort of reacting to things prior to even experiencing them, and it's like reacting in a, like our unconscious mind is doing it, something like that.
I mean, he must mean something like that. I mean, otherwise it doesn't. Unless it's just that the only thing I hesitate is because he when he explains what he means by experiential, he says this meaningfully structured experience, level of common sense obviousness. Now, that seems something that has to be post. If something is obvious to me, can something be unconsciously obvious to me?
I think I know what your kind of what your mind is going around. I think maybe it's something like this. Like there's an orientation reflex which we have, maybe is something you're thinking about, like where we there's a relevance realization which is centered around like repetitive stimuli, right? Like a familiarity with your environment. Is that kind of what you're thinking about? Maybe?
Well, no, I'm getting that relevance seems to be realizing something is salient, and I think that's how he's defined it earlier as focusing in on what is salient and ignoring what's irrelevant, right? That's what relevance realization is.
Yeah.
And
over the long term, like played out as a process,
or even just at any point. Just, I think, like, we're doing it all the time right now. Listening to your voice is relevant to me, whereas my TV over there is not. Even though my TV is in the corner of my eye, right, I can see it, but it's not relevant to me. So I don't focus on it.
Yeah. So I would say the fact that it's a process is actually like a very key idea. It's and it's directly tied to like what we were talking about before I turn the whatever recording on. Like that there's a, well, I guess we don't have to hash over that again, but
Did
you want to add something, Nick?
Yeah, I was just going to say my issue with it was less in it being pre-experiential in the immediate. That kind of makes sense to me, which is like, with this active experience, you're loading up all these structures that are there before you start interpreting it or doing anything with it or anything like that. That makes sense to me. Where I struggled with his kind of temporal relationship going on here was more in the beginning. So if it you end up in these kind of like bizarre redundant loops where it's like, well, how can you ever learn to be relevant? Or
okay, so you're looking for an explanation for why.
How does relevance realization dawn up from the experiential,
right? Well, that's always
in reverse.
That's exactly where I go too, like at the very end of the series, and you're like, well, okay, John, explain what exaptation really is. What is consciousness? What's going on here, Johnny buddy? Like that's where all my mind is going to always. Like,
well, that's where, he equates relevance realization to intelligence. So
yeah, I would say, I'm close to saying that too. I'm I think that's direct. Yes, very much so. It's like the thing that shepherds the process back and forth and sculpts it, right? It's the thing that it's the thing that plays in the gaps. I was just trying to explain the relationship between the vibrations at the microtubule level through the whole Penrose hammer-off scheme, right? But if you think about this, like if these conscious states are these microtubules at the kind of way down at the deep cellular tissue level, they're vibrating at these very particularly high rates, but they're doing so at quantum collapse states, right? So consciousness could be this, at our unique human experience, is something like the gap between those quantum collapse states, and that's what they're essentially stating, that each of these collapses is what initiates the quantum or initiates the conscious experience, and that is kind of what it is. It's like and that's where you find will, by the way, and this is the discussion that we were having in Discord. That's where you find your free will. That's where you find the playground of consciousness and its ability to actually make trajectory changes in these data structures, right? And that occurs across extraordinarily phenomenal layers of energy and complexity and abstraction, and it's just truly remarkable. That's why, I mean, like, I'm totally in agreement with Vervaeke that cognitive science is like the thing that you want to study if you want to kind of like try to wrap your head around your head.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting
that's
that
the
you think of
by the way.
consciousness. You think of consciousness in the Penrose model. I think of it in the integrated information theory model. And it's interesting.
No. I do the same thing. No. That I think they are layered on top of each other. They're technology stacks. They're ways that you and I have models of seeing it, but I think they're directly tied to it, because the integrated information aspects are what give us the texture, the particular characteristics of these quantum state collapses, right? The sum orchestrated.
I did try at some point a few years ago. I tried to read a little Penrose, and I didn't last very long.
Well, look, this is what I want to. This is what I want our group to really do. Okay, if you want to, this is what I think is really, like, this is cool. Like, if you want to get a good, like, if you want to sink your teeth, your claws into this stuff, I think that's what you do. You look over the current state of the art in terms of understanding how the mind works, and I think if you do that through the Penrose model, the Penrose hammer-off, probably Bandyapati needs to put on the list now, but due to his work at Harvard. So if you put those guys into the mix, and then you also bring in, I think, McGilchrist's work. I really think this is important, right? So if we sit down and we study these works together and hash it out, right, and really bang it out and hit the Nietzschean hammer on it and all, like I think, like, really you get a good sense of what's going on in here, and also where the mystery is, right? And like,
I mean, I'd be open to that. I mean, I know Penrose, Hammerhoff, at least Penrose, not interested in writing for a lay audience. That's for sure. He's
pretty
he
accessible.
flirts on the edge. Yeah,
his papers maybe. I've tried to read his papers. Maybe
you tried to read some of his papers.
Yeah, that's. Have you looked into his books? He's got two.
I haven't read his books. I
picked up The Emperor's
papers.
New Mind the other day, and I started reading the introduction, and it was just this long drawn out exploration of some sort of algorithm, mathematical algorithm. Yeah. I got to the point where I was like kind of skipping a little bit, but at least I was glad I read it.
He
because
does a good amount of that, but he ties it in
I managed
really
to get an
interesting ways, and
I managed
still
to get an
basic
understanding
enough that you can like get along with like kind of basic logic. It's not like
even
far
though
out.
Even though I didn't understand the actual mathematics that was going on, I kind of got the point that he was making.
Right.
That like the human mind can recognize when things will always end up one way or the other. Like I think the exact mathematical formula he was saying, like it'll always end up into zero for some reason. If you run this algorithm, it'll always return back to zero, and that's no matter what number you start with, it's going to return back to zero. And I think that was like kind of the main point that he's trying to get at with his book, just because I've listened to some of his other talks where like the thing that differentiates a human mind from a computational model for a mind is that it can recognize infinite patterns or something like that, where
you're talking about the halting problem, probably. He discusses the halting problem, whether or not certain algorithms would terminate.
Right, but there's also the Penrose like shapes or something, or like
Penrose tiling.
Yeah, Penrose tiling. That's one I'm most familiar for what his work is.
Yeah.
But yeah, and at least, like, even though I didn't understand the mathematical formula that he was using to explain the idea, I got the idea nonetheless. Yeah.
Well, and again, it always comes up, but Gödel seems extremely relevant here.
Yeah.
Which is like, if you're looking for a kind of what separates a human's processing power from just any algorithmic processor, you have this ability to always see the inconsistency in a system, and then to then extrapolate a new system that incorporates the inconsistency, which will produce a new inconsistency that allows you to extrapolate a new system ad infinitum.
Yeah. Also, in the Vervaekean way, I mean, that's why logic can't solve most problems, because most problems are open problems that we're dealing with incomplete information, and we can't run them algorithmically. We can't just go where we can't run them by just logically going through a direct deductive argument.
There's actually a example that's used by Douglas Hofstadter in his book Gödel, Escher, Bach, where he gives you, he doesn't even tell you the point yet, but he gives you like this math problem to try to solve. Like, okay, you got to get to this end result, and then you start doing it, and then you do it for like, I don't know, 5 minutes, and then you start realizing, wait, I'm doing the same exact things I was doing earlier. Like, do I keep on trying to do this? And then you keep on doing it to the point where you're like, okay, this is just, I'm stuck in a looping pattern. I'm recognizing I'm never going to be able to hit that goal. And that's the thing. Like, if you were to tell a computer to do that, it would just keep on running.
Just keeps going.
Yeah. It wouldn't be able to recognize that the process that it's using to achieve the goal is not going to get at that goal. It'll just run through a combinatorial explosion, whereas the human mind, at least, is somehow able to break that loop, which is, I guess, part of both Penrose's and Hofstadter's. I'm not actually sure how much Hofstadter argues for this, but for the fact that the human mind is not computational or cannot be recreated in, say, silicon. Yeah,
it's a strange loop. Yeah. It's a loop with an ill-defined boundary. In fact, a non-deterministic boundary, let's say. So like, if you were to consider like if you like do a freeze state of your cognitive functions right now, your actual physical state right now, there's a little boundary of cognitive function that you can see, like visually, right? But the exact edges of that they're indeterminable, right? They're at the quantum layer, right? That's what I mean by like that being a vital element of it. And because of that, the unique shape of that quantum state is influenced by these non-deterministic rules, whatever the hell's going on in that weird quantum foam stuff down at the bottom, right? Like, that seems quite clear now. And I guess people who are kind of indebted to the notion of thinking that consciousness is like completely solved now because we can look inside our...
Wait, who's saying consciousness is solved?
There's no like particulars, but there's this strong feeling, that like you just kind of...
Sam Harris seems like he thinks it is.
Right, like you keep putting your microscope at it.
Yeah.
No,
Sam is eventually going to be able to write a book that just, when you finish reading it, you're like, yep, I got it all figured out, and it's just all there, and I'll be able to go to
if
the
you're
coffee
making
house
the
Actually,
argument.
his wife just published a book on consciousness, so I guess we could check that out to see.
Panpsychism. If you're, I don't know. I feel like if you're making the argument that determinism is the case, then at some point you have to have some, at least, hint towards a unified theory of mind. You're presupposing a unified theory of mind in order to think that a human can be a deterministic creature.
Yeah.
Right? There's no other way. That means that the human mind is functioning on algorithmic processes.
I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends it depends what the ultimate... I mean, it's hard to say without having the theory to to look at. I think because we don't know how it's. And remember, he's open. He is most, along with most people, say it's probably it could be a mixture of determinism with randomness, and so
Sure.
I don't know, but I don't know. We're probably going to get off course if we John Buck and I have been doing a series on free will on my channel, on my new channel. So you can join us next time as we're working through this, and we could do that. So the next
I don't know. I think it's actually deeply related to a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. Okay, because look, you got an R and you got an R. You got two sides of each equation. You got two hemispheres. You've got potential states. You've got actual states. All right. There are balancing acts that occur in nature. There are constant energy exchanges and fluctuations, and the most complex kinds are occurring in the pistons and valves of the mind. Right. Like there's that kind of exchange that's occurring, and I think that the more we understand about how the mind works, and this is quite clear with the research even that Vervaeke is sharing, that there is something fundamentally tied to the quantum weirdness, right? And conscious states, and that is.
I should bring up that, at least as I understand it, the Penrose theory of consciousness doesn't rely on free will being an actual.
It does not. That is correct.
That's correct. Could be either way, really. It could be that consciousness is part of the quantum mechanics that are changing the microtubules one way or the other, or it could be that the quantum fluctuations are something that imposes itself and causes consciousness to occur as sort of emergent from the microtubules.
Yeah, but this is directly related to the problem of free will. So which is kind of an artificial problem, I think. So
do we want to discuss his I don't know, I was gone for the first couple minutes. Do we want to discuss his use of the term religio?
Yes.
Kind of get a better understanding.
Well, we do. So we're coming up to that. Did we want to first, like we talked about the pre-experiential? Did we his other two before he gets to religio, or he talks about that it's pre-egoic and pre-normative? Did we want to go through that first at all, or is
I think
we hit
kind
on
of
it
makes
with
sense.
Okay, well, I can add in some kind of physicalist, cognitive structure on top of that, let's say. But what you're looking at is essentially levels of abstraction and or interactivity of the same kind of sets of patterns. So you have data from the outside world that comes in and is largely processed in the right hemisphere as the landscape, let's call it, right, as the forum for activity for the agent to engage in. And within that space, you have attempts to locate your body within it, and then what you have as your capacity to move within it, right? Like I'm making all these motions because I know I can do it, and I can move around in this kind of space that I have modeled in my mind. But all of that is kind of constructed, we know, as conscious experience in primarily the left hemisphere, right? So you can consider that as like additional construction, modeling on top of that presencing of the landscape of the world, right? Like I'm moving my hand around in front of me in the empty air that I have modeled in the right hemisphere as a landscape, and my left hemisphere, which is the grasping hemisphere that makes sense of the world, is modeling and then enacting this kind of behavioral motion through that space, right? So this is the representation of all those stacks, right? So because at the very end, it's the normative behavior. What should I be doing with my body? And I'm doing it right there. So.
That makes sense. Oh yeah, because kind of how I was interpreting it was from Jill Bolte Taylor. She's a neuroscientist that had a stroke, and she has a TED talk on YouTube of her experience with that stroke, where she only had access to like one hemisphere, and then she got access to both hemispheres. So like when she was in the right, I guess it would be the right hemisphere. Yeah, she had no access to like for communication or language or anything like that. And her relation to like what it felt like was like everything was interconnected with everything else. And there was no I. You were just kind of part of the universe.
You can induce those states, by the way.
yeah, depending on the dosage. And that's just kind of like what I understood him to be meaning. So, and it seems to make sense that for any theory of consciousness, that the sort of right hemispherical way of going about is sort of the underlying part, and then like from that you can kind of build up a more confined sense of self or ego from that.
That's where the ego is. That's exactly right. The thing that's graspable, the thing that you think you have power over, right? That's the ego. That's exactly it. That's why it's constructed in the left hemisphere. The thing that you're consciously aware of is this, you're embedded within the right hemispherical landscape of possibilities, right? Because I think this is just the differentiation and survival tendencies of the two hemispheres and the way that they process information.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to bring that up for McGilchrist. He relates the two hemispheres in sort of a predatory / prey understanding, where if you're a prey animal, you're going to need to have a much better sense of awareness for your surroundings in case there is some predator that kind of pops up, and then you got to book.
Yeah, and if you're
a predatory animal, you have to have like both eyes forward, and you're the one locating your target, and then you're honing in on it. And that's kind of like the pairing up against the two hemispheres that you have.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's subdivided into like your visual fields too, like the central foveal attendance to attention, and then the peripheral landscape, which is attended to by the right hemisphere, right? If you think of it like, if the left hemispherical always gets to the thing that you want to gravitate towards, move towards first, then the right hemisphere doesn't get to it, right? The right hand grasps it. Now the left hand's left empty. So what does it do? It's now no longer constrained. See? Like it's no longer like this is very Heideggerian, right? As you grasp an object, your hand, the thing that's attached to the thing inside here, is now constrained by a particular shape, but the left hand is not. And it is free to be open and like expressive and understanding, and honestly, like in a higher state of like I guess from a higher resolution, to dream about what it could hold. You can think of it like that. And that's actually how the two hemispheres end up working out together the best survival strategies. And that's the predator prey, because the dreams of what could be are you worrying about, in some sense, if you can eat the food, that's dreaming of good things in the future, or if you can escape the predator, that's being worried of fear of what is possibly coming around the corner that you can't see. And that's like, these are deep, like pre-experiential structures, right? They're like way deep down in something you never experienced as a human being, the scrambling for life at the base of a tree for like this monstrous creature like chasing around you. But you'll go to a movie that has a dinosaur chasing something, and you'll feel the terror deep in your bones, that atavistic horror that you have. Pod, way deep back, one of your ancestors ran from a dinosaur, right? You know it. It's deep in your bones.
Sure. Do we want to? Well, I mean, I'm like, when you focus so much on the left and the right, are you just setting out just where everything, like, well, let me ask, why do you think it's so significant? Like, I get we can map out where these things are coming from, but
because I love curious, this stuff, man. That's why.
Okay. No, but do you think, what I'm trying to get at, is there a
is there a teleological aspect to it?
Yeah, like are you just talking about, or like,
yes.
Are you just talking about a model, like you're just saying this is how it works, or is there
remember I was showing you this before?
A metaphoric point. Yeah.
This right here at the top is the important aspect right here. This is the balancing aspect that needs to occur. That's why it matters. Okay? That's why it matters. Because you have two hemispheres, and it seems this is directly related to mental health. This is directly related to the sociological layer in which these kinds of things show up, the dreams of zombies and vampires. All of it is expressions of the manners in which these things break down, and much of it is related, I think, to this balancing act. It's utilizing both hemispheres in proper manners. They need to be walked like dogs, right? And they each have to be walked in a particular way. The left hemisphere has to build models of the world which attend to and care for the creature as a whole, which is the right hemisphere.
Are you almost suggesting that we should be employing? Is it that we do just tend to use these equally, or that we should actually be using
No.
psychotechnology?
I think
that we should actually be using psychotechnologies to train both sides of our brain to
both.
optimize.
Yeah. So our psychotechnologies are the things that we're using to meditate and alter within the inner space, right? But then the relevance realization thing kicks in, which is that you have the capacity to alter the landscape itself. You're the agent within the landscape. And those are the tools that extend beyond the boundary of our skin. Okay. That's actually further extension. This is the beautiful thing of the parental qualities of creation. This is why every tool ever made, this pen, the computers that we're using, they're acts of creation, because they're physical separations from our body that we constructed in here from the exact same mechanisms, pre-experiential mechanisms of reproduction, right? Like we use those same things. That's why they're deeply tied.
But do you think that we just naturally use both sides of our brain, or do you think some people use left more, some people use right more?
Okay.
I thought that was sort of a myth that we
right.
all used our whole brain.
Think of it like a heat map
all the time.
Think of a heat map on the brain, right?
Yeah.
And imagine like a half a dozen or a dozen different spots on each side glowing a little hotter than the others. And now imagine each person has a slightly different heat map, right?
Right.
That's how you are getting and the combinatorial explosion which occurs when you when you change each of those heat maps according to a spectrum of capacity, right? These are individual proliferations of network effects and the individual capacities for each of those cells to function well, right? This is why diet and all of that stuff is so highly correlated with things like well-functioning brains. And yeah, so yes, balance is important. That's ultimately what I think is teleological important for us at the pragmatic level.
Although the balance could also be at the societal level, meaning we have some people who are focused more on one, some more the other, and there's probably pros and cons to that.
Well, let's yank in Piaget, because here we pull in Piaget. And the thing is, if you start first balancing yourself, then you feel balanced, right? No matter what. And then from that space, you look out into the world around you and see what resonates with that balanced inner space. Now
but I'm wondering, does balance necessarily there produce the most insightful
I think that's the best way
results?
to represent it. I do. I think, and the balance is and I don't think of it as like a strict 50-50 ratio. Again, it's the heat map thing. Balance is sometimes highly skewed for people, right?
I mean, like you would think somebody who has the heat, their configuration is hotter on one side, and maybe somebody who's extremely hot on one side may achieve some deep insights on involving that area that someone else wouldn't, and maybe they have a deficit.
Yep.
In
often
other ways,
they have a deficit. Often they have a deficit. Yep.
So that balance in itself is probably good on a societal level, and for some people, and it is good, but it's not necessarily bad to not be in balance.
Yes, in a strict way of speaking, that's true. In a strict way of speaking, but I think what it is to be holistically aware of this balancing act at your level, at the level of pod, the egoic constructor of things, that is a balancing act that you, the conductor of things, is doing. That's what I think it is best represented as. That you have a sense of something being out of balance, out of whack, right? I could use a lot of different metaphorical languages, right? Like this very Vervaeke goes into. There's something out of balance, and you have to put weight into, or effort into, or attention to get it back into shape. And that, again, is the mysterious nature of the exaptive process of consciousness. You attend to it, right? You change where you are looking and then manipulate whatever it is you're looking at to make it better or to make it worse. And that's,
All right, well, I think this leads us well into spirituality. So Vervaeke lays out what he calls the aspects of human spirituality, and and he sort of defines this list as with the name Religio. So I can go over just sort of quickly. I'll quickly just read out the list, and this is this right side of the board that I put up earlier. And I'll in a minute, just because I'd have to scroll up. I'll try to put it up again. But so we have. I'll do it quick, and then we can go back slower over any of these that we want to. So complexification, which leads to self-transcendence, self-deception/foolishness, connectedness, perspectival, participatory knowing, which leads to procedural knowing, co-emergence, creation, agent arena, the binding of agency, caring, cognition, altered states, higher states of consciousness, deep metaphors, deeper than ego, etc. So this is his list of what he describes as the aspects of human spirituality. Now, it's sort of an odd way to, like, human spirituality, we usually think in a much more sort of
metaphysical sense.
Metaphysical way.
I
I
did find it weird. He uses the word spiritual very comfortably for a person that does not pose any existence of a spirit.
I think I noticed a direct shift to a little more comfort when he began his interactions with Vander Clay and that aspect of the YouTube community. I think it was reaching out to that.
Well, I'm not sure. Did he really? He sort of seemed to do it in an offhand way, but I'm not sure he really defined the word spirituality.
Well, I think he's bringing it in directly as an aspect of talking to that community, and you can see that in the way that he presents his material. Like he's explicit about it. Right? That makes sense that you would. Yeah.
I mean, so what do you guys think of this list as being the phenomenology, I guess, of spirituality? Does it gel with you as sort of as theists? Like, because it's a very odd way of setting it out.
Yeah, it gels with me. I mean, I sort of. I took it to.
It's not inaccurate. I don't think it's all encompassing, but it's kind of like putting a bunch of little dots on a relatively massive structure.
Yeah.
And they're not misplaced dots. They're part of the structure, you know. Yeah.
Like he talked about the fundamental grounding of being and being connected, and that these are the same. Like I think that's what he's talking about, this feeling of spirituality, this feeling of being grounded and being connected to everything, or to be somehow fundamental, keying into that.
So like right hemisphere again, right? Landscape, the environment, all this stuff. It's pulling in this information, and it's got really broadly, densely connected networks, right? That's what it loves to do. It's just busy processing stuff and like overlapping images and non-specific categorical systems. It's trying to make sense of all the stuff the left hemisphere is not looking at, right? And so think of it as like the model of the world, right? So like the ground of being. It's from that ground of being, from the arena and from the relationships that exist within it, the self arises, and that's the direct set of neurological structures on the left hemisphere, right? So you can kind of like turn the head sideways, and you can see how the self is standing on the ground of being, right? And like what's really interesting about it is the degree to which you are successfully a creature on the globe, moving about, doing your things, is how you've carried out this process, this egoic process of self-structuring, self-directed structuring of your habits and particular cycles in your brain, right? And so think about this, right? Let's say, because this relevance realization process doesn't kick unless things are wrong, things are off. So let's say this.
Wait, hold on. Relevance realization, he defines as just keying into what's salient to you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I could further extrapolate from that. So salience is actually like movement towards something, right? It's It's like the inertial momentum of certain habitual neurological loops, something like that, right? As they play out on top of sensory data from the outside world, right? You can kind of see how as those patterns overlap, you're just used to paying to the outside ones that overlap with the ones that you're used to playing for the models in the left hemisphere, right? In the same way that you tune a radio dial until the antenna matches just the right vibration frequencies for the waves in the air, your brain is kind of doing that, right? And so when you think about this, this is actually where my mind went when I was thinking about this earlier. This is really hilarious, actually. To do this, do this thing where you kind of visualize yourself, and then you've got sense data coming in, but it's very abstract, right? It's like light and sound and stuff. But let's concretize it. Let's reify it, right? So imagine, like, instead of light coming in, it's like strings of thread, right? So like it's like a physical string attached directly to the thing that you're seeing. So it's like a ray of light, but it's a physical string. So then, like, imagine that filling the space. So there's like this weird dense fabric in front of you, right? Yeah. That fabric of information, which we've given physical identification in this visualization here, is attached to all of those weird little inner antennas in your mind, right? That's what that information is doing. It's coming in and vibrating those antennas. So in this sense, those things are coming in, and they're like a puppet vibrating the antennas in this structure here, right? Okay. That's Religio. That's this weird cosmic creature, this thing, this massive thing that we ordinarily just think is like this non-existent landscape, so to speak, but is really just these tendrils of physical interaction with the outside world shaping an inner space, right? That is the thing which with you plead daily to enact your desires. That's the landscape that you perform your behaviors and functions in. It's the thing that your left hemisphere attempts very dramatically sometimes to wrestle with, to alter, to pull on a few of those strings, just a few at a time, to get them to agree with what you want, right? To get your desires. The thing that you pray to, for it to subtly tug just a little different way for you to get what you want. That's what Religio is. It's this great, incredible filter of a landscape that we sit within and struggle with, represented in our left hemisphere as our ego inside this thing over here as a model.
Well, so what do you think? So what do you think of, a religious person will often say they're connecting into God, but everything that we've described here and what you've just described is connecting into just different parts of the brain.
That's the best part. Okay, that was that was the punchline of the whole thing. The threads, that's the flying spaghetti monster. Caw!
Did we break you?
Such a good punchline. Come on. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. I think that's ultimately why my brain went there, because it's so perfect. That's exactly right. Like the tendrils of influence and information that come in, the wiggles in our ears, and the straight lines, the radiant lines of light that come in. That is the flying spaghetti monster. And we give it a character. We give it a face to interact with. We get an abstract face to interact with, to pray to. Christians do it with
I mean, you if I hear what you're saying, you're describing sort of a metaphorical God, not an actual sort of ontological.
All thought is metaphor. You want to go into that one? It's all metaphor, yeah.
Yeah, no, but I mean that you don't seem to be talking there of an actual deity that's existing there, from if I understood what you just said.
Okay, no, okay. Freeze frame that crazy image I just gave you. Now wind it back through 1 billion years of evolution until it was a rock. What the hell is that thing that's wiggling its antenna until it becomes this?
That's the Ubermensch,
The
actually.
specificity of the nature of existence gives one a personal God, even if you start with something like Plato.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, so think of it like this, though. So if you do accept the fact that the left and right hemisphere are so dramatically different in the way that they see certain things, it's also the case that they both struggle with their conception of what God is, right? Because I think it's relevant that the left hemisphere processes in a particular way. It's very convergent. It prefers a model which is exact and right. It prefers geometrical shapes, exact structures. And the right hemisphere prefers ambiguity. It prefers it prefers symbolic structures, overlapping meaning, whereas the left hemisphere prefers signs, prefers exact meaning. It prefers language, one word, one meaning, right? This is why I brought up synonyms and antonyms, by the way, in terms of understanding free will and how we develop cognitive linguistic structures and all that. But this is it's vital, right? It's yeah. I feel like I've been talking a lot. So
No, it's good. I mean, you think in such a different way for me that I like it, but I can't, I must admit, I don't always understand it.
Yeah, you
So
pull me
trying.
back and ask whatever. Like I get I think about these things and then look and I don't do it in words most of the time. So when I come onto these discussions, all the words come out, right? I uncap the cork. I'm like, ding, and it's and then so I expect whatever comes out unintelligible or confusing or whatever. You just kind of
Well, Nick seemed to get it. So Nick, why don't you give your perspective here?
Yeah, well, I was trying to kind of find a balance point between what he was saying and how you get to the ontological God. Right, the personal God, a God with a face and a personality,
or regardless of a face, a God that exists, a God that exists out there somewhere as a real separate being rather than I think we lost John here.
It's okay, he'll come back.
Oh yeah,
it's Ouroboros. It all comes around. Okay, this is what this is how you answer that. Okay, because we exist.
Wait, hold on. Let's let Nick go.
oh, was he gonna go? Okay, yeah, do it.
Yeah, well, just the way that I've kind of sorted through that, it's kind of like you can't, even if you start at the supposition of just there isn't the ontological God, instead you have a God that is made up of just everything that is. Right, so the universe, right, that's the common synonym that we now use for God for non-religious people. And then right, you see all the interaction.
I just kind of did that with the thread thing. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And it's right, the universe is the people will bargain with it and they'll ask it things, they'll interact with it in these peculiar ways. So even if you start there at this kind of we might call it the ultimately dumb and blind God. Right, it has no consciousness, it's totally stupid, it doesn't care about anything, right? It just is. If you start looking at the isness, there's, as far as I can tell, there is no way to avoid turning that structure into something that can explain the fact that we live in a universe that persons. Right, so there has to be some aspect, right? We live in a universe that's not made out of pure objective qualities, it's also made out of subjective and transjective qualities. If you start looking at all the things and take an honest account of what we're in and what we're a part of, you inevitably end up relating to or forming a personality of God. And you can do it at any level of abstraction, right? You can do it at the level of abstraction of electrons are attracted to protons through the electromagnetic force. That is a very distinct character that does not have to be, right? And when you start watching that interaction pile up layer after layer after layer until all those layers add up to you looking at the layers, you kind of fall backwards into the personal God, right? It's
Well, it built us. You know, all this is actually real. I'm assuming you guys are real, right? This is real. It was built.
Are we?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll let you answer that one, Pod. But this is
No, you answer it.
yeah. Well, I have. I have. I
Yeah,
mean,
no,
yeah.
okay.
I've.
And now I disappear.
I would just assume the internet went out, right?
Yeah.
Um.
And yeah,
Yeah.
that's like how I branch also from Plato's kind of he doesn't quite overtly call it God, but right, Plato's world of ideal forms.
Mhm.
And the relationship, we might call that the archetypal purity realm, right? The archetypally perfect. You get this interrelationship between that and the world that exists, that
Yeah.
you start
That's
having
like
to
a dualistic.
explain things also with personhood attached to it, or else you end up being unable to account for your own personhood, and thus throwing a very fundamental aspect of the reality of the world out with it.
That's exactly right. It's like whatever your neural antenna is doing right now, it's resonating as a person, right? And if you are losing that sense, like if you are vibrating with these other objective things, let's say in the external world, if you're trying to de-subjectify yourself, so to speak, that's exactly your feeling. That's it. You have this weird sense that you are deconstructing a sense of self. That's that's why I think it's really important to balance discussions of ego loss with necessity of the ego and what kind of a vital structure it is in the development of really any kind of plan or idea or anything. Like, hey, what? Hello, goodbye.
John's having technical difficulties.
Yeah, my laptop like shut down while I was still using it, and it was plugged in, so it like threw me off. I was able to listen in still on my other laptop. So
Yeah, I thought you were unusually silent. Yeah.
Well, so I guess one interesting, I think, angle of this is, you know, is that Vervaeke is still setting out a completely secular version, or at least that opens up a secular version of spirituality. No, but I think you guys will be open to that. There are some people who I've talked to online who some religious people who don't believe atheists can have spirituality, or seem to not think. But I'm guessing you guys don't
probably fall more on the fact that atheists will necessarily have a spirituality, no matter how atheistic they might consider themselves.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, let's just, if we said, for the sake of the argument, say like there is no whatever, there's the universe, but not sort of a God.
I'm not sure what you mean by that, Brett, because from what you hear from a lot of Christians that become Christian is that they have a spiritual experience while they were still atheists, and then that's what caused them to become Christian.
I mean, sure, but I mean, I hear all the time, and this is anecdotal, of course, but atheists are, have no meaning. They have no morals, and they have no sense of connectedness. Or
I think that's ridiculous. My tact would be to argue against their actual position as an atheist.
Or the other side is that because of what, for example, Vervaeke has talked about, that there may not be a God except maybe you could say the universe, whatever. But
listen.
As it's said, but we have these experiences, of spirituality that some people interpret as coming from an external ontological being.
I figured out another
or
reason
beings,
or
beings. That's right. Don't be monotheistic.
I am not dissing the pantheists.
I was thinking
not the pantheists,
the gnomes that come and tickle your toes while you're laying down.
On the
the polytheists. I'm not dissing the polytheists.
And to your point, Pod, I think that if you did have, if you were to run the atheist program in an algorithm, then you would end up with something that is at its root has a flavor of nihilism and does not have a strong foundation for a moral imperative that is anything outside of, I don't know, you end up with lots of problems if you were to 100% be consistent in the philosophy. I think the problem is that nobody is actually consistent in any of their philosophies, whether it's a Christian saying they're a Christian or an atheist saying they're an
Well,
atheist.
it's really hard. It's really hard to be.
Yeah,
but
well,
that being said,
arguably
I
impossible.
disagree. I think morality is entirely consistent with there not being a deity. But that's a whole other other discussion.
Maybe not a deity, but certainly you need some type of metaphysic to hold it up.
I mean,
you need a universe. You can't just bake a pie from scratch, right?
Well, we're in a presuming that we're already in a universe. No, but I agree.
Oh, that's a lot of presumption there, Pod. I mean, God hands you a universe, and you're like, well, presuming God didn't hand us a universe, and we just got.
Well, we find ourselves in a universe, and we find ourselves in a universe where we live with other people, we depend on other people.
I know.
Right. But there's still the differences. Like there would be a difference between atheistic and Christian morality in that there are certain things like which would make sense within the Christian morality, such as to like lay down one's life for your friends or something like that, with the expectation that it provides you with, I don't know, something beneficial in the afterlife. Which such a justification wouldn't really work.
I was gonna make a quip. Yeah, the atheist one's better, but no, I'm just
okay. So let me
rephrase it in Vervaekean terms here for a second. You need a religio.
Yeah. Okay. So let's bring in religio, which is right hemispherical relevance realization processes. That's what I think exactly.
And we have that, right? We have that whether or not there's a God, right?
Yes. Okay. Well, so let's say again. So imagine then it's the left hemispherical that does the modeling. That's the thing that does all of your goals, all your goal-oriented behavior, all of your conscious plans about who and what your egoistic thing is going to be doing today, right? And you're doing that in the context of the petitions that you're making with the environment, right? Like the various tensions that you have with resistance of motion of objects and all that crap, right? So your direct relationship with all of those things is guided by a set of beliefs and structures and telos and a system of oughts.
Remember, relevance realization is pre-belief, right?
Well, I'm saying all of these cognitive aspects are involved in the shaping of your day-to-day behavior, right? But in these processes, the combined sum total, let's say, in the same way that your ego becomes a sum total, a kind of emergent total of all of these sub-processes in the cognitive structure, the sum total of the magnetic pole, your telos, for who and what you are, can be various things, right? It can be money, right? You can be fixated on this pole of money and be drawn towards it. You can be power. Like you can fixate on these very particular kinds of idols that are these magnetic attractors that situate all of your actions and behaviors towards that thing. Now, here's the kicker.
Well, hold on. Just to refer back to Nicholas's point that if you're a determinist, you would have to assume that all of those things ultimately wind down or converge onto one specific thing, like the desire for money and the desire for sex and the desire for food. These are all based around, say, the desire for well-being or something.
So when you say determinist there, you probably mean like more like reductionist, or
I don't know,
because that tendency to converge on like a singular explanation, whether or not free will exists, you can still kind of
maybe that. And it would still make sense.
No big deal. Yeah. Reduction. Yeah. So exactly. Yeah. But I think the point stands. Yeah. So that's it. So, but that is, again, that's a left hemispherical preferential mode of treating the world. It prefers an exact model, one that doesn't have to alter itself. And that's Sam Harris to a T, by the way. And that's why his right eyebrow is so fantastically raised, because his left hemisphere is constantly going, let me make sense of that one. He's like, so like you can actually see it play out on people's faces, by the way. It's
ever since Paul Vanderklay's video on Brett Weinstein and his conversation, I've like had this idea stuck in my head of Sam Harris the pirate, where he's got one eye patch on one eye, and then when he wants to talk about more, like we can have objective morality and all these types of things, that's when he's speaking from internally. And then when he needs to talk about determinism, he'll just.
I gotta say, I listened to that. And wait, Paul Vanderklay is a very skilled speaker, but I don't think he was fair to Sam Harris in that.
Brett kind of pointed it out to him at certain points during the conversation. Like it's, I don't know. You can kind
If
of
you're
see
100% consistent with the thing you just said, then the rest of the stuff you have to say
Right.
makes no sense whatsoever.
Except that's where I think he was wrong. I think I don't agree with everything with Sam Harris, but I think Sam was far less contradictory than Vanderklay was. I didn't take notes though while I was doing it, so it's hard.
You can also think of it like with we recently listened to the video on Descartes, and Descartes had his big kerfuffle with Hobbes. Was it Hobbes or Locke? I think it was Hobbes. Yeah, about like rationality. Like if you don't have the cogito, the immaterial mind, you can't really have this basis for rationality. Otherwise, the thing that we think can be rational, that can apprehend truths because it was teleologically built for apprehending truths, it is all we have are these kind of like evolutionary apes that are the movements of, or what, the Spinozistic billiard balls bouncing off of each other. And like that's something else with Sam Harris, is like he's very rationalistic, but he's also a hard determinist. And those two things.
And he's also quite spiritual.
And he's very moralistic as well.
You know what we should do? We should do a midweek stream where we either go through just the original Brett Weinstein, Sam Harris talk, or we go through the Vanderklay version. Either.
I'd be good with the first one. Yeah.
All right. So, but what I see here is
wait. But let me finish my original point. By the way,
go ahead.
real quick.
Right.
Okay.
Sorry, my bad. Tyler.
No. Yeah, it's fine. Again, interrupt me all the time because if you don't, I'm just gonna. So the character with which you form the teleological landscape and which you coalesce all of your goals, the way in which you see yourself becoming more like not yourself towards a better self, is dramatically important. Okay. And that is why the character of God and the thing that you consider your God, the thing that you form all of your actions and behaviors and thoughts around, matters. Right. That's ultimately how most people are. And we can call this like the Jordan Peterson definition of the personal God, right? Like that's how most people experience God, is at that layer of the thing which forms their highest expression of the magnetic pull.
Okay, but that's a separate thing from whether it exists. That's a metaphorical use of God, and I get that. It sounds like a useful metaphor.
Yeah, but look, do you want me to prove God right now? I mean, like it would take how long?
No. But
it's not proof, by the way. It's just.
But the point is this: that let's just take that for a second. Like if we see God as a useful metaphor, then this spirituality can belong to anyone, because there could be other useful metaphors other than God that could achieve a similar result.
I can't.
Not what? Yeah.
So if you
come up with something better than God,
your God a consistent object or whatever principle, your philosophy around it will fundamentally be ironically inconsistent, right? You can't uphold a religion that's based around money or power, right? It will collapse under itself.
No, but I didn't say money or power.
Right, but it can be any consistent, harshly defined term.
Listen,
there's a reason that
we have
every religion plugs into that variable something that is absolutely inconsistent.
Look, don't make me bring in Gödel. I will yank Gödel right into this conversation, and we will blast the hell out of this thing.
It's not like there's one version of God. I mean, everybody has their own version of God. Plus, the religions have their own versions of God as well. So,
yeah,
so what I'm saying is, we do have, even dealing just with God, we have multitudes upon multitudes of these metaphors.
All right, here,
because everyone has a different,
accept this one. Here, I want all atheists,
which is
anyone who ever
for
watches
what God
this.
is.
Here we go. Right.
Which is sorry, what was that, Nick?
Every single person's conception of God is non-existent.
Yeah.
Sorry, the God is non-existent,
which is fully
or the perception of God is non-existent.
Fully in line with the religions and what they say about the nature of God.
Yep.
But what I'm saying is, it's also consistent with, put it this way, if there isn't a God, you still have your metaphor of God that has a use, right?
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the thing.
You can't help it.
We exist within a reality in which we need to make sacrifices. And so the question is, like, what are we going to be making sacrifices to? And if our definition of God is that which deserves all sacrifices being made towards it, whatever that God is, if it's the God of well-being, God of myself as an individual, of hedonism, or the God of, I don't know, Christianity, or God of Buddhism, or whatever it is, that's the thing. It's like, even though like we can define God as like the ontologically greatest being, greatest conceivable being, or the most perfect being, or something like that. Yes. Which would be like a description in regards to, I don't know, objective properties or something like that. But, or we can describe, or we define God in regards to like, how do we act according to this God, or how do we conceive of it? And that's the thing, like, whether it is, whether there is a God or not, we would still be acting in such a way as if we were worshiping, like, if we devote a great period of time, like if we're sacrificing all of our spare time to, I don't know, read books or something like that. That would be a way in which we thought of the logos, or just reading and wisdom in general as being our God. And that's like a very pagan, I guess, understanding of God, of like a personal deity or something like that.
Well, and to perhaps another angle here of argumentation you could make, to your point, Pod, is likewise, we can't prove that the universe exists. You can't prove that your children are real. You can't prove.
You mean you can't prove to 100% certain?
Yes,
but
they're all useful fictions. It's useful fictions all the way across.
Hold on.
So
saying we can't prove it to 100% certainty doesn't mean we don't have very good reason to believe.
All right, hold on.
Likewise with the argument of God.
Let's break this down for a second. Okay, let's break this down for a second. So let's say you have an adaptive strategy with the world that is exactly fit. It's conformational. It's perfect to the environment that exists out there, right? What you're assuming in that case is that the environment is static, right? That it's unchanging. Because if your perfect state is in here, is exactly this way, conformationally designed to react in a particular set of circumstances, if the outside changes at all, you are no longer perfectly situated, right?
Or you need to be adaptive, right?
Mm-hmm. It just started raining.
It's a sign.
It's very loud. I'm sorry. Can you hear it?
Right. So your point, Pod, is that like we can't prove the ontological reality of a God, but
reality.
But we still have good reason at least to believe our children exist and external minds exist, things like that. What about the fact of the matter that like there are still deities, and deities in regards to how we act in accordance with, like say the state being one such deity, that we're going to act in accordance with the laws of the state, so as, because I don't know, we have some sort of belief that they deserve to be acted in accordance with.
Sorry. I mean, first of all, I wouldn't call the state a deity, but
that's the thing. You're defining deity in regards to an ontological status, like an objective reality to it.
An objective being, a being that exists independent of us.
Right. I'm speaking in regards to the functionalist definition of the God.
No, but that's what I was saying. Like the metaphor. I mean, the point I was trying to make though is sort of the bridge, that this provides a bridge between religious spiritual people and non-religious and non-theistic, like theistic spiritual people and non-theistic spiritual people.
Pod, here I have a question. All right, okay, just let's see if this makes any sense, because you are conscious, right? And we agreed earlier. I'm just assuming. You can answer no if you want.
And actually, I can be certain. It's one of the few things I can be 100% certain of, that I'm conscious.
Good. Well,
no, it's just an illusion.
All right. So, okay. So what we discussed earlier.
About that one. Yeah, that's separate.
What we discussed earlier was that it's getting louder. The storm has arrived.
I can't hear it. Yeah.
Your brain is a resonance engine, right? That it's vibrating at a particular rate and trying to match the rate of the kind of sensory information that it's receiving. Right?
Be right back.
Okay. And again, remember that the depiction of the threads of information interacting with the external world. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So in some sense, you can say that the world inside here is modeling the world out there, correct?
Right. We're taking in information from that world and we're creating a model of
Okay,
what we're
so
taking in.
everything in here is a model of stuff out there.
Or based within a model.
A lot of it is. Maybe not everything,
whatever,
but
emergent
a lot
from
of it.
whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, but
Like
a
we
lot
can
of
build
it
up
is,
the idea of a unicorn from horses and I don't know,
All
ibexes
right.
or something.
Well, we
can add to that. We can add to that from just purely internal.
Okay. So all right. So look. So consciousness is inside here.
Mhm.
What is it resonating with out there?
Information. So
It is, if consciousness is a thing in here, and the things in here are resonant and emergent from the stuff out there, can we state that there is consciousness out there?
well, first, I mean, I'm partial to integrated information theory, which would say that there's consciousness whenever information is integrated.
Mhm.
That's where I sort of lean right now. But
I don't understand what information means because
But
like
so information is like for example, waveforms of light are information. We receive them in physical information, and
when they're
there's,
being received,
there's a paper that I've been trying to find that I had years ago and I lost it. There's a paper which has even shown that you can transform the laws of physics into like information theory. That information, all the laws of physics can be translated into information theory. Like it all works through entropy. It all works together. But we take in sound information. So we take in, we have vibrations in our, I'm terrible at the technical stuff, but we have waveforms of waveforms come in and it gets processed in the brain. And when it gets integrated in the proper way, we have a quality experience. We have an experience. We have an awareness.
And so like the way that I think of it is like information is that byproduct. I don't really think, I don't know if it makes sense to say that the information of, say, I don't know,
just think of information as being the organization of a system. Like that's information. Like, how they say that information gets destroyed in a black hole. Like that's the type of information I'm talking about.
Okay, so that's the physics definition of information. So like what Leonard Susskind, his or the within the physicist's understanding, information is that which can draw distinction, or that which we can draw distinction of regarding. So like a photon, or not a photon, an electron will be either spin up or spin down, and that's basically like a binary information.
Right. So every system will have an information state.
Right. But that's different from a mental qualia of information.
Well, if integrated information theory is correct, is when a system integrates information, which is something they call phi, there is a quality experience attached to it. So that's what IIT says is consciousness. That consciousness is when the system and it presents as a irreducible experience to the system. So our brain body is a very good integrating informational system.
It's just the thing that like the qualia event is of a fundamentally different type to the air ripple. So like say I say the word love. I say the word and that is interpreted by you using the power of language and all that to understand it as a mental concept, and maybe you have some sort of relation to it, to like the people that and things like that. The waveforms or the ripples of air that came out of my mouth and then got picked up by my microphone and then digitally interpreted and then sent off. These are all very different types of information than the byproduct that we have of understanding the word in regards to a meaning or something like that.
Right. So, like I think
and just because, say, the ripples of air is integrated into some sort of system does not mean that system has any sort of qualia associated with it. Like that's the thing, like just ripples of air being
well, no, it's not the ripple of air. The ripple of air is translated in the brain, right?
oh, yeah.
And I think that it's in the brain that it gets integrated. So it's not integrated outside of the brain. It comes into the brain, and then
but
Tyler
you
can
said
probably
that
explain how all the different parts of the brain are going back and forth. That's it's these feedback loops that are in the brain.
They're correlational states, right? They're just really like if things are vibrating near in time. Again, that smear of consciousness that we experience. That's how we collect these kinds of chunked qualia-like experiences, right? Most of them are chunked.
I still don't get how you would avoid a kind of panpsychist god at the root of integrated information.
Because integrated information is a type of panpsychism, but it doesn't say everything is conscious, because not everything is integrated. So, for example, a rock has no integrated information.
But the universe as a whole system, as a whole singular system, necessarily has a higher level of phi of
I don't know if that's
system
okay.
inside
now,
of it.
Hey, listen. Oh, I got a good one for you. Okay. Two good ones, but I'll just go with the first one for now. All right. I take in information as a human being. I intelligently process it, and then I send out information which is the product of intelligence, correct? Right?
I mean, intelligence is a type of information.
So so what? Okay, let's say I take sound waves in which are not the product of intelligence. A tree falls in the forest, whatever. I hear it, right? It gives me a mental image, tree falling in a forest, and I think, tree falls in the forest, and I yell it out, right? It's intelligible patterns of information. Now John's percussion waves. Timber. Yeah, maybe I'm a Canadian. I yell what do you guys yell up in Canada? So there's.
I think it's still timber.
It's beautiful. I love that whole industry. Actually, it's got this kind of romantic notion of it. I think I read some Jack London novels a little too young, and it's just kind of like deeply embedded. Anyhow,
but of course now it's clear cutting, so it's not quite as romantic.
No. But there are wonderful videos on YouTube of current like Canadian lumberjacks who go in and like do the selective cutting and all that, and do it the proper way.
I was thinking of that like excavator arm that like grabs the tree by the roots, saws it.
That's fascinating to watch.
And then like runs it through and like chops off all the little branches on the sides.
Yeah, that's
you were having a point there, Tyler, about unintelligent information being processed in the brain and then expressed as intelligence.
So let's say I don't do it just with my voice, but I beam a beam of light out into the universe, right? We're doing that all the time now. Right? We're sending off these radio signals, which are intelligible patterns made by intelligence. So let's just kind of fill the universe with those patterns of intelligence.
This is what SETI's doing, right?
What is that?
SETI.
I mean, what is it you have when you have a universe filled with intelligible patterns?
I think Brett's meaning though is like, in order for you to say that the information is conscious, there would have to be some sort of recipient, or
it has to be connected in a certain way.
Some sort of system that can pick up that information and then integrate it somehow. Maybe that's a word.
But again, the universe is necessarily integrated.
I don't know if that's true. I mean, I don't know if that's true. I mean, for example, my brain and your brain are not integrated together, right? So there's a block. We have an integrated system, but then we have the space around us that's not integrated. So I don't know that it's necessarily true that you would say the universe as a whole must be integrated.
I think it's really suspicious. I think it's really suspicious that the timing of light and sound happens properly in my mind. I think that's really suspicious. I do. I think it's really suspicious.
Like I don't pretend to understand the math of phi. Like so maybe I don't know if I don't hear the people who are talking about integrated information theory saying the universe must be integrated, but I can't speak to that. But maybe other people can. Like if you look at the calculation of phi, it may be obvious that it's not, at least how they're conceiving it.
It's just the notion that like the speed of sound in a vacuum and the speed of light in a vacuum are necessary components for the manner in which the brain composes reality. Those rules and the manner in which it processes the information
I think
are
it's more
embedded
about
with the physical
feedback
structure
loops, though.
themselves.
It's more about feedback loops, and these feedback loops don't exist everywhere,
No,
and certainly not on
They don't
on a
exist everywhere, but
universal.
you're constantly thinking in terms of confined systems within an overarching system. So no, they don't exist everywhere within the system, but they necessarily, if you have a system producing them, then that system has to be integrated with the systems it is producing at
I don't know if
level.
that doesn't
It
seem
may just
obvious
be
to
used.
me. But I mean, I'm not saying, I'm not ruling it out. Like, if
Is it
that's
kind
the
of like,
case, I accept that.
is your point, Nicholas, kind of being like, say I have a window that's running Zoom on my computer, and then I have another window on the backside that's running Twitter or something like that. And so I have information integrated within the window for Twitter, and I have information for the window of Zoom. And they're not connected with each other, but they're both being run off the same computer. So they'd have to be
Yes.
integrated at some point underlying.
Yes.
Okay.
But that's not
also
really, integrated is not just connected. It's a certain type of connection.
well, I
It's
think
just-
it may be something a little bit deeper than that. Maybe the fact that the universe is intelligible at all, period, right? The very fact that we can take any signal anywhere and transform it through whatever manipulations we want somehow into an intelligible capacity for our senses to interpret means something at a deep layer, I think. And it probably has to do with this integration aspect that the very being and structure of nature itself is set up in a way that it's capable of being processed
Right.
by
Well,
us, or
IIT
vice
would
versa.
consider consciousness to be a fundamental property, just the same way that mass and velocity are fundamental properties. So IIT does hold consciousness to be fundamental in that way.
Yeah,
Now,
me too.
Wait, I thought IIT just said that consciousness, like all matter, had the potential to be consciousness, not that like it is
right. That
I don't know.
all matter. It's only when it's information is integrated.
So, like it cannot be reduced once you have
right. It's not
consciousness. It cannot be
decomposable.
reduced.
Correct.
Okay.
The system will have an irreducible experience of consciousness.
Okay.
And you can imagine our system could have sub consciousnesses. Like, for example, we're made up of bacteria, which may have their own experiences.
When people say consciousness is fundamental, is some sort of like idealism or
yeah, no, it's not an idea. That's why it's sort of a pseudo panpsychic.
Right.
It's not full panpsychic that everything like rocks are conscious, but it's close. So I consider it panpsychic like
if they were, I don't know, put into some sort of integrated system.
If suddenly they have
integrated. If you turned a rock into a computer or a transistor or something like that.
Well, although again, computers, like our normal digital computers at least, are not, according to what I've read, don't integrate information. So like our digital computers do not, at least now, integrate information, though a photodiode would. So a photodiode under this theory would have some rudimentary conscious experience.
And what is the difference? Or I don't know if you know exactly, but what
I can't explain.
Okay,
I can't. You can look up like.
I'm telling you, at some point we should have like a full-on conversation on your channel, or maybe even on this channel, of just kind of going over some of the strongest theories of consciousness out right now. Like, I'm kind of interested in Bernardo Kastrup's, especially with his connection to DID. I think there's definitely something there.
I've read a few Kastrup stuff, and I actually have chatted with him several years ago.
Oh, really? Oh, that's cool.
I was involved in the Skeptico forum for a few years, and he was a member there sometimes, and so we chatted and DM sometimes too. But
cool.
He's a nice guy. I don't agree with his take, but I like him. It was funny when I'm reading his book. I was like, I think we have similar thought structures, because I would be reading his book and I would put a note, and then a paragraph later he would address that note. So we do think that's why I do like him, even though I disagree.
That's how you can tell a really smart thinker, is when they're coming up with the rebuttals to the objections just on the next page. So.
And then I listen to other stuff and I'm like, I don't understand any of this. So sometimes it clicks, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I can feel really smart, other times I feel really dumb. It's bizarre. But
No, it's very normal for me. Yeah.
well, I mean, honestly, Tyler, I love listening to you, but I struggle to grasp what you're saying a lot of the times. Like you just think you have such a different model of thinking than I do, and you understand things on a much more. I'm terrible with the technical stuff, and you're great at the technical stuff. So I lose it sometimes. Like for example, I'm not that familiar with which side of the brain does what, and
well, that's
so
that's why I think we should take the time to go over some of the
Yeah.
stuff that I think is kind of integral to making sense of all this, to integrating the information. Like it really is like it's vital in the way that it helps shaping the right. So in my own sense, because you have to build on top of that knowledge, you have to build structures on top of that. So the pragmatic aspects that I have invoked in my own life with that knowledge have to do with the balancing act that I think needs to happen in my own life. And it is also deeply related to like again, the sociological level. So the interpersonal stuff that is shaping much of the tension and it's just the BS that we deal with from day to day. And a lot of that is the tension between like the masculine and the feminine. So which is left and right hemisphere. And this is look.
If I could just bring, okay, finish, and then I want to bring it back to something I was talking about earlier. But yeah.
Well, so again, it goes back to the personal God thing for a moment, because if you go back to the development of human beings and the way that happens, the early development in children is highly attuned to, again, the antennas vibrating in your mind. It's highly attuned to the mirror neuron model of watching your parents behave and then acting like them, right? You try to enact their behaviors. And that is, again, setting up these kinds of models and patterns of behavior in your mind that take on a presencing in the world and that shepherd a certain characteristic to the behaviors of things and that give comfort and explanations for things. And all of that shapes much of the let's call it the filter, the direct filter with which you engage with the external world, right? The handshake that you make with the cosmos is through that lens, through the lens of the parents and or lack of parents and all those memories that you have in the early shaping of yourself, let's say. And then at some point you have this weird sense that it gets handed off to you as a personal creature, right? That's the conscious creature. And now you have a God to wrestle with. And it's, again, that weird abstract thing that you're trying to reach for, but that you reach for through all of the particular handles and configurations and cognitive biases and frames and all of that stuff, the relevance realization factors. That's what you're reaching through.
But this actually leads into the point I wanted to make, which I always come back to the theme of, trying to bring sides together. And in this case, it's bringing the theists and the non-theists together, that regardless of whether we're a theist or a non-theist, we all have this machinery of religio. And that whether or not we believe in a God, I think recognizing that, I know, Christians will frame it as, well, they act as if there's a God. But what we can say is we have similar relevance realization machinery, spiritual machinery, religio machinery, that we're more alike than we are different. And that just because we may have different beliefs about whether a God exists, there's a lot we can key into together that we can share despite not having that same belief. Does that gel with anyone?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I was very happy that of all the possible words he could have used to explain that or to group that category, that he specifically used religio. Precisely because for what you're describing here, where it's putting everyone on an equal footing so that we can actually, it opens up conversation, I think. In a useful
that's
way.
The brilliance of this, I think, that rather than focus on the differences, we can say, you know what, we all have this machinery. Like the question I should put this out on Twitter. Like if we put aside the "are you saved" aspect, it seems to me that there's so much that theists and non-theists could get together on and agree with, if we just put aside that whole the God aspect. But there's certain moral aspects, spiritual aspects, just how we interact with one another. That if we just wouldn't a theist who believes in, a Christian who believes, in salvation, still at least prefer a non-believer have these certain characteristics in common with them, and an appreciation, say, of ritual, such that Vervaeke talks about, of the serious play, of connectedness, of this religio. Wouldn't they at least prefer, if they can't have them saved, wouldn't they at least prefer to have this in common with them?
I think yes.
That's what the religion literally tells the people to do. So.
Yeah, right. So
although I'm not sure a lot of people act that out, though. I think
I agree.
Practice,
I agree, but
I
would say it's nonetheless codified in the religion. People fail to live it out in every way imaginable. But
this is where I'd like the focus to. This is where I think our focus should be, to some extent. Is this is where we can build these bridges between the theists and the non-theists. This is the door.
So in the abstract realm of that religio, of the right hemispherical adaptiveness to the environment, let's say, if you're placing the divine, the numinous, if you're let's get poetic, if you're clothing it in the trappings of fashion, of the current trend, it limits, it fundamentally limits, it puts a boundary on, let's say, the growth, the potential growth rates, or even just, the descriptive capacity of the thing that you call God. And I think there's a very real expansiveness, there's a very real opening of a gap, let's say, between what is now and what could be considered a divine future, when you put something of a particular character out into the space beyond you and then move towards it, right? So the world that you build in your attempt to reach that space is defined ultimately by the character of the thing that you're moving towards. That's why I think it matters so much at a certain level. So I would agree that, say, just stopping at the religio level and stopping at the socio-cultural kind of layer provides a certain foundational structure. But I'm not yet convinced that you can build a Tower of Babel that high.
But
Right?
Look what
Only
you could
gets so
do.
high.
What if you could say, what if the Christian said to the theist, to the non-theist, okay, forget about whether there's God or not, forget about whether Jesus existed or was divine, was the Son of God. Let's just look at what's in the Bible and look at the metaphors, look at the patterns that the Bible brings out, and let's just talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me,
largely
I
what
would
Peterson did.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I think Peterson technically is a non-theist, but he finds incredible use in the Bible for the metaphorical truth that he calls it, and I think there's a lot in there. Now we could also say there's a lot in there.
Let's see what happens when he comes out of the rehab foxhole.
Well, I guess at least up until.
I say that with the greatest respect, by the way. I'm laughing, but I
no,
I
know.
hope the man recovers well. It's an atheist foxhole joke.
But
he's not an atheist.
No, but it seems to me that there's, if we could say, hey, let's just deal with. And that's one thing. I mean, I have differences with Jordan Peterson, but I find this. I think that sort of take on the Bible as these archetypes that have sort of psychological lessons for us that we can take, is useful. And I mean, the interesting thing with Peterson's, when you listen to his Bible series, is that, to me at least, it seems pretty clear that he's not really dealing with whatever the writers of the Bible had in mind, that he's taking his own meaning from it, and that's and there's something about this series of texts that allows for that type of analysis, and
Yeah,
that could be useful for theists and non-theists alike. And 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 then you could take in other religions too.
Okay. Okay. Hold on. This is perfect, right? Exactly. So like, the relevance to today of the thing in the past, right? It's resonance frequency, its capacity to resonate strongly, right, with the present, is an interesting thing, because take music for example, right? I can listen to a record that's produced today and I can jam out to it, and I can listen to a record produced 10 years ago, and then 10 years before that, and I can keep going back in time. At some point the music starts to sound kind of funky, and I'm like, I don't jive with this music. It's not the same anymore, right? And this, the way that you categorize things and call them what they are, right? Like that's always changing. It's always changing. So music is a type of language, and it has a record, and it's handed down through time, and that's why I can track those kinds of changes. Religion is also that thing, right? It's also a set of types of musical aughts, right? It's not notes played on instruments, but it's words written on pages and read off of scrolls in a particular way with a series of aughts that you sing your moral behaviors rather than on an instrument. So that well, it's funny that the jangling bells and all there's well, I'm not going to go there, but there are musical instruments to moralism too. So there's and then the tooting of horns. So yeah, so there's that, right? Like, so you can see how like the same processes are occurring there. So my relevance to music today is the same as my relevance to religious patterns from the past and music history. So like if you have a pattern that's resonant from, it's still resonant from the axial age, right? Bronze Age patterns which are still resonant, right? That's fascinating.
Or these patterns may come out of human relevance realization, and that's why and then they get codified in these tales, and there's the question that I have of, could we consciously write, like you said, do something better than the Bible, or than God, and like, could we consciously write something that has the power of these, if we presume that these books evolved more, that they didn't just sit down to set out a pattern, but that they were unconsciously setting out a pattern through these writings. Could we consciously do so? I mean, I don't know, someone like Scientology with L. Ron Hubbard, or well, I mean, I don't want to. I know you're.
No, I was just going to bring it up if you didn't. Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. Yeah. Absolutely. In fact, Pod, I'd love to sit down with you and read the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you can walk me through it, and you can tell me which parts you think were written by a man and which parts were written by a god.
Well, or
Joseph Smith take a couple doses of psilocybin before going at it.
It's probably more like an epileptic seizure, would be my guess.
True.
And that was William James's guess too, and I think it's quite accurate. But that's not to downgrade the event of what occurred. I'd love to like extrapolate on that, but it's not necessarily time for it here. But yeah, there's definitely an aspect to the creation of frames which are really meaningful throughout time, that somehow strike a chord which is resonant throughout time so significantly and across multiple different octaves and multiple different keys, right? Like, so you can build off of that chord into a lot of different ways. And the structures that you build from that fundamental key, from that root key, let's say, are the fruits of the religion, the fruits of the original song that was composed. And that's generally how I see it.
And theists and non-theists could talk about those patterns together without, if we could just put aside for a minute whether there is an ontological God, like whether that being exists. There's, I think, a lot of conversations that aren't happening that still could happen, that could bring the sides together and say, hey, the other side's not quite as bad as we thought.
Yes, well, we're all human beings, right?
Right.
I don't know. I've been wondering about this lately. I really have.
If we're all
wondering
human
about
beings.
this, yeah. Okay,
I'm a figment of Pod's imagination, so
well, not that. What if
shifting reptiles?
What if how like technology is always lagging?
Wait, what if each of you heard, like I heard, I'm a figment of Pod's imagination. What if Tyler heard I'm a figment of Tyler's imagination, and Nick heard I'm a figment of Nick's imagination?
You
Oh
just
my
keep
God.
saying the same thing over and over again, Pod. What are you doing? Okay, so
Ah, ah.
all right, okay. All right, I lost it.
Start writing the
Oh,
next
sorry.
Twilight
I
No,
Zone.
no,
came in
no.
with-
What if we're actually aliens? That's what you're getting at, Tyler.
No, not
I can
aliens.
see where
Okay,
you're
what
headed.
if? Well, okay, look, technology is always lagging behind the secrets that the government figured out years ago. You know that. Okay, so we know cloning is a thing. We know that CRISPR is a thing. Yada yada yada. What if 60 years ago, right? Unbeknownst to us, they figured out cloning early, and they grew a bunch of people. Huh? They grew a bunch of people, and that's baby.
Well, now we're getting to the
Baby
simulation.
boomers. Oh, they just had a bunch of extra babies because they came back from war. No, they inserted the clones. Okay. Now the thing is, though, the clones don't actually have consciousness. There's something missing, right? The spark of life didn't happen in the proper way. That's why all the NPCs. That's why we're dealing with Twitter bots and Twitch thoughts and all that crazy stuff. And that's why Donald Trump is president, because we are literally living in a world that's highly populated by things that don't have conscious awareness.
I mean, I do have an issue with the philosophical zombie. If they were
Yes,
exact,
pea zombies, exactly.
but if they were exact duplicates, I think they would be conscious. That's the thing. I don't think you can have consciousness if you have the same.
I know you
have
think
the
that.
same biology. You're gonna have the same. You're gonna have the same experience.
Do you want to know what brings us into this world?
Sex.
That's part of it, buddy. That's the fun part. The birthing part is, not so fun, but well, I don't know. It's actually miraculous in the moment that oh, guys, come on, you should all be fathers to try it. Oh, yeah. If you haven't been through a birthing process as a father, I urge it. If it's not possible, then attend someone else's. Just be there in the room.
No, don't attend somebody else's.
No, I mean, don't just show
I'll
up
tell you-
randomly.
no, but
Hello,
you know
I
what?
saw you were having a baby.
with my first kid, and I think I've told him this story. My mother-in-law, my mother-in-law and my mother were there at the hospital, and my mother-in-law just pulled my mother into the birthing room without asking us, and we're just there while my first child was born, and it's like very uncomfortable. You want it to be just a very private, you want the doctors there, of course, but it was
Miraculous
anyway.
moment, okay? And it's
Don't ask someone
parents.
to join their birthing room.
It's the love of our parents, which is a unique, strange
That's what I
concoction
said.
like DMT and serotonin and all that. Yes, and oxytocin and all that stuff, like hormonal chemistry, just all that combined is like this kind of orgasmic explosion of welcoming to the world. That's what birth is.
I see. And so if there were beings that were not created via the conscious intentional act of love or something like that, they would not have that same component.
And that's why you see feral children and abused children as like almost non-human in many cases. So I don't know, man. I'm not saying it's real, okay? I'm just trying to throw some Alex Jones level stuff out there so that we can get it out to like. So when you're talking
now,
people,
John, you got to
give them a
come in
little
with the
bit of a-
simulation. We're all in the simulation, right?
Well, I really
go
I
to
put
my
it out there
simulation, I
because I'm not sure if you're on the level, Pod. I'm kind of trying to figure you out still, man.
That's right.
But
Do you see
this
the reptilian eyes, right?
Well, no, you told me, right? You had the whole you couldn't make images in the brain thing.
That's right.
Oh, well, maybe
But I do
that's
in my
the-
sleep, and I did it twice. Twice I had the images
Awesome.
inside.
No.
so-
There's actually someone else that I was.
There's a
talking to.
spark there.
Yes,
That's right.
Okay,
There's a
well,
spark
this
of
is-
consciousness.
This is the experiment, though. This is in fact why they cloned you in the first place. They wanted to see if they could elicit consciousness, if they could bootstrap it from I think it's initially to test the bicameral theory of consciousness. So if you are in fact reporting conscious states, that's great. If you could just let somebody know.
That's
Yeah, but that's the problem. How do we know he wasn't just programmed to just say, "Oh, guys, I'm conscious." I'm
That's right.
experiencing this
That's right.
sense of self.
you know what?
guys are all talking about.
How do you
I'm
know
not
I'm-
actually.
how do you know
I'm
I'm
not
not
actually
the
seeing
one?
you right now. I just see, the matrix lines.
Yeah, I'm actually not even physically real. This is all machine learning. I mean, you've been reading about it in the news, but It's been around for a long
He
time.
actually exists within his computer, and
Yeah.
it's just this like empty backdrop, and then his picture overlaid onto that backdrop.
Well, if we're in the simulation, can you roll back attacking Iran?
I
I
don't
guess
want
they
to
would have
comment.
to.
I don't want to comment on that in this video, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I'll see what I can do.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, talk to the programmers, John. And, you know, as
Every
you've seen
night.
through the Matrix, you know, once you get out of the Matrix, just say, you know what, can you just like undo that? It seems like bad things are going to happen.
oh. Well,
That's right.
something bad did happen. I mean, we're laughing about it, but something bad did happen.
Yeah.
Like, it's bad in a lot of different ways. It's good and bad, just like all things in the world. It depends on the perspective that you take and the position that you have to be sitting in while you're looking at it, right? And I don't like death. I don't like killing. I don't like the idea of perpetual war, but that's what's existed in that region for a very long time. And
Well, the issue now is it going to pop out of that region? But
no, it's been popping out. It's been popping out like
yeah.
you know, kernels in the popcorn machine. It's been doing that for a long time. But we've been directly heating that thing, right?
Yeah.
And that works very well with the whole oil sands thing, right? Like it's
And wait, impeachment? What impeachment? I mean, what? We have a war to talk about, right?
No, well, I don't know about that. Yeah, I
I
would.
don't really know where the impeachment would have gone anyway, just because.
Yeah, the impeachment is just complete political stunt in order to affect the election. That's essentially what it is.
Anyway, we seem to be kind of winding down a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you guys
No,
want
this
to
was
go on a
good.
little bit further with the lectures?
I think we hit a lot of it. I mean, the most interesting thing to me is the secular spirituality, and that I think it is a bridge. That it is a bridge that I think Vervaeke is trying to focus on, and that in terms of like spreading, I think that's a message that I think can resonate with any people that is simple enough to understand that we all have this machinery that produces these experiences, and so we can talk the same language, we can share our experiences and maybe bring people closer together.
Yeah,
I agree.
Path to world peace.
Path to world peace. So if Trump doesn't finish us off, maybe we'll get to
we'll get to trip out and then vibe together.
So all right, so I want to think about it like this, okay? Time starts now. In the next slot of space, I'm going to be speaking, right? I'm filling it with words. It's an empty space of possibility and potential, right? What words am I going to fill this space with, right? What is it that's generating the stuff to fill this space? Now, it's my ego, it's my combined set of experiences and knowledge and a bit of a tug and pull of the history of the memory of the conversation that we just had and the relevance related to all of that, right? Like it's just, but what if I consciously alter that right now in some way? How do I alter it? Can I improve it? What's the goal? Is there a teleological structure to it? What if I'm paying attention to the, let's say, like what is the goal of our conversation? Is it purely educational? Is it inspirational? Are we trying, is it expositional? Are we trying to convince each other of something? What is it that we're doing here?
All of it?
Yeah, right. It's this crazy soupy mix. And that's why I love these conversations. But ultimately trying to resolve those aspects of it. What general teleological structures and frameworks do we use to put a constraint on the very words that I'm using right now? What frameworks am I using? Now, what I want to say is there is a set of words of all these combinatorially explosive possibilities that I can say in the next block of time, right? There's a whole set of them. And our job as human beings, as conversationalists, let's say in this very moment, is to reach for a kind of best experience. Philosophers will often describe this, the philosophia, as Reiki would say, this reaching for in the kind of numinous expanse of open possibility, reaching for the best, reaching for the good. All right, that is very much a divine process if you allow it to be. Because again, the boundedness of that feeling that you have is directly proportional to the thing that you identify it with. And if you cut it off at a particular layer, that feeling of awe, oh, we didn't get into that. I really wanted to go into that. But
Yeah, we can go into it. I've got time.
okay.
Yeah.
Everybody, okay.
Yeah,
So
that was interesting. Going into his lecture 34, he brings in this connection to the term God that like we kind of have lost, but it's all throughout present within the Old Testament, especially where the term God is not so much understood as like a moral being, but more so as this intense part of nature, or it's not even part of nature, but this intense numinous entity which
it's the spaghetti
inspires
monster.
awe. And it's not, and it awe there being used both in the sense of awful
Awesome and awful, right?
awesome. Yeah.
I like the
Mhm.
ends of those words too, like some.
And
Awesome.
full.
Like just a little awe is nice. We like it a lot, but like
Yeah, yeah.
full, it's
But when it's
full
too
of
much,
awe,
it's like, no,
then
way too
it's
much.
like, oh no.
Oh, that's
Too much.
interesting. I
Too
never
much.
thought about that. I never thought about that.
Well,
That's-
okay, so let's bring in discussion of what awe is and what I think is going on there. And this actually has to do with the orienting reflex that I thought you might have been referring to earlier, in fact. When you orient towards something novel in the environment, right? Like what you're doing is you're seeing a pattern that doesn't fit a resonant pattern that you currently have. So the pattern comes in, it doesn't match something, and then your orienting reflex says, pay attention to that. So your phobia, your central vision, whoop, you look right at it and you're like, whoa, right? I got to start I'm paying attention to that thing, right? Oh no, I just lost the thread. Where did it go?
Lost it.
You got to be careful, Tyler. You're like
and then
spinning all
I-
these threads, and then
you-
they just get away from you.
Oh,
Yeah.
That
Okay.
was the answer to life, the universe, and everything, and it's gone now. The
Dude,
solution to all of it, man, it was there.
All right. So connected to awe and connecting to the
Yes.
orienting reflex.
thank you. Thank
Yep.
you.
You're welcome.
Good. You bring it right back in. Okay. I was so far ahead. Okay. I was in the way wrong place. All right. So awe and all right. So when that orienting reflex happens, what you're doing is you're having to grow a new neural network that resonates with that thing. Okay. Or you turn away from it. You have different orienting reflexes, right? And that's where disgust comes in. That's also related to openness, which is also related to intelligence, which is also related to making sense of things. And you start to you unpack that stack that he bottomed out with G in, and right. So anyhow, so awe is the gap between that moment when you recognize the difference in a pattern thing, and what it is it's a certain flood, and let's not get too specific yet, but it's like a certain flood of neurotransmitters and biologic chemicals in your brain that is stimulating neurological patterns of growth, right? You're trying to stimulate a new neural network structure to grow that matches that thing out there. That is awe. In a kind of pure sense, that is the conscious experience of that pre-filled moment. It's just the gap. It's the gap of ambiguity before it concretizes into something that you can attach a name to. Now, naming, the process of attaching to another network, of integrating that information, by the way, is very much a left hemispherical process. And so I think what happens is, on the substrate of awe, you then build a process on top of that. So there's a compositional nature to the.
Just wouldn't
Oh,
all be
yes.
happening far too often if it's just that? I mean,
What do you mean just that?
like anytime I see something new, I don't necessarily have a feeling of awe. Like,
Yeah. Okay. So all conscious states can be defined across a spectrum. This seems like throughout, right? So you can have awe in terms of the numinous and like being overpowered by a sense of awe, or you can
Or
have
just
a
like
very,
curiosity.
very tiny, slight orienting reflex towards, was that something new? Nope, it was just a bird on a post, right?
But
that is.
here's what Vervaeke describes awe. Awe is an accommodation, an opening up.
Mhm.
We come to know I am transformed, knowing how I've changed and the disclosure of how it is bound together.
Mhm.
So it's awe is a being mode. So to have awe, there is a self-transformation.
What did I just describe?
When-
Exactly that moment of the self transforming to match the environment. That's exactly right. I'm totally agreeing with him. What I'm saying, I'm trying to tie it to biological processes because it's it's useful, and fun.
But am I transformed anytime I see something new, or am I only transformed when it's something huge?
You're transforming all the time, no matter what.
But I don't have that feeling of awe all the time. Sorry.
Well,
Perhaps
it doesn't.
this-
Yeah. So in terms of integrated information theory, the complexity of your qualia experience of awe is directly related to the amount, right? It's the emergent amount of awe that you're going to directly identify with. So if it's subconscious layers, it's only like 10 decaliters of awe per whatever, right? But if like a really attractive woman comes into a room and you're like, whoa, like the awe levels start to go up and she looks your direction, like, whoa, the awes are just woo. Or maybe like the heavens open and you see rays of sun, like that's a completely different experience.
All right. I can sort of buy that.
All right. Yeah. So what happens is the moment you can attach a sufficiently explanatory model to the thing that is growing the awe structure in the right hemisphere, by the way, which is predominantly where it's located before you can attach a name to it. The moment that happens, you have a loss of awe. You have a sense that you can explain things and that there's less, and this is exactly why people don't like the whole magic thing and explaining how magic works. Once there is a loss of awe, of that gap of like, what is it? You concretize it, and it is now a pattern which exists solely as this loop of explanatory structure, which doesn't change much, right? It's concretized, it's explained the world. You don't need to make any more sense of it.
Interestingly, as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say it turns it into something mundane.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quotidian, every day, a pattern, a habit, a loop.
Another interesting aspect as well, which Vervaeke somewhat brought up in his example of watching The Shining, but it seems like there's also a measure where the more secure we are in our explanation, the more violent it is when awe hits us, right? Because you can kind of see, like, we start forming these crystallized, really solid definitions or interpretive
ruts.
Yes. And then
well worn.
Right, the way he described it was really interesting. He'd already pretty much dismissed the movie in its entirety because he had figured out its pattern. So then right when the pattern finally breaks, it has a really dramatic effect, as opposed to perhaps he was uncertain the whole way through the movie, and then there's a plot twist at the end. It still might invoke some awe, but it's not going to hit at the same level as being led through the what you think already.
Think about what's going on there, because what happens is if you think of the right hemisphere as just like, oh, I did this. Okay. So I was trying to describe consciousness to my mother the other day, and this is how I did it, right? So imagine like you took a picture. Consciousness is a bunch of pictures being like a snapshot of the world. It's not just the visual images, it's also sound and proprioception and all that stuff. But it takes a snapshot. We'll deal just with the images for now. We'll consider that slice 1, right? But that's happening roughly between like 40 and 80 times a second, depending on how you slice up consciousness, let's say. So let's just say that's happening. So let's take a bunch of those slices and then put them in a Rolodex, right? And then so imagine each slice, right? So it's like a loaf now of experience, and we'll just spin it, right? And if we spin it between 40 and 80 times a second and we watch that, that is your conscious experience of like the visual images playing out. That's your frame rate of experience. And yeah, so I think that's an interesting way to think of what it is to like experience the states of the world, right? Like that's essentially what's occurring. Why was I? It's been a long day. Okay, my brain is really starting to just like to go into crazy. What was I saying just before that? Come on, John. This is your job now. You've done so good so far.
Something about awe and the kind of going from a crystal or
That's what you were saying. Yes, 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 yes.
yeah, was it building off of that? Oh, also, is it very cold? Or I would rather have you very cold or very hot. Came to my mind when I was watching.
I almost had what you were talking about too. And
That's such a good. That's such a good. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
See, no,
Tyler,
you
I
shouldn't have
failed
said
you.
that. You should. Oh, I just went. Oh,
Sorry.
No,
I wanted to
no,
get it
no.
out before it left my mind.
No. That's good. That's good. You should have said that. I shouldn't say it that way. Yeah, you should have said that. That's good.
I can't catch them all, Tyler.
No, you can't. They're like
gotta-
they're like Pokemon, but you can't, right?
The
You gotta leave
pitches
a
are getting a little.
You've got to leave a thread through the maze that you're going
Or
through.
I do.
open up
Go
the
back on it when you
stream
need
and
to.
rewind. If you
Yeah,
open up
well,
the
no,
stream and
so
rewind.
the problem is so right now I'm running on like pure momentum of ideas, and the problem with that is my short-term memory is kind of, it has to necessarily power down, I think, at the very end of the day. It's like there's not enough glucose left to function all the things, so it just like selectively powers down certain things, and part of the short-term auditory loop goes away. So actually, if we wait a little bit, I think actually I recall better.
We were talking about The Shining and
Yeah.
One of the
Well, okay. So
interesting
I mean,
things-
I had look. This is the problem. I had like 3 thoughts that I wanted to say that when he was talking about The Shining, but that's not the thought that I
Settled on.
was that I was building off of.
mystery. Does that help?
No. It's the Rolodex thing. You see, it was the Rolodex thing that just went.
Why were you
okay.
wanting to explain consciousness to your mom?
Yes, right. So what that did is it stuck me in the parking lot of Publix where I was talking to her, and that is where my mind is now. Like I'm looking at the car, and it's over here. Okay, so like it's really hard to like break out of the context of the conversation. So it's
Well, what brought you into the parking lot at Publix? What was it that led you to?
I took her shopping, but no.
No, in this conversation.
Oh, we ran into somebody very strange, acting very strange, and then we had a conversation about my brother Joseph, who had recently experienced some kind of lapse of consciousness, and so I was trying to explain certain of those processes.
Anyway, while we're waiting on that, there's something that I found quite interesting from Vervaeke's lecture, in his pointing out how the sacred and using sacred in its psychological sense, I guess, how there's this aspect to like what we find sacred or what we find great and terrible awe within or from, it is how it has these almost like 2 contradictory functions that it can play within us, where it is the thing in which we can feel sort of like it's the thing that hones people together into like having a harmonic understanding of themselves within their world. Like the very term he uses, religio, has to deal with like the binding of things together. But there's the other function, I guess, where what sacred is kind of like what brings to light just how fallible and incapable we are in our current position. That it's so weird. It's like if it is very much like 2 contradictory things, which makes you kind of question whether it really is the same thing that's happening, because it kind of doesn't make sense if it does these 2 opposing things, where it makes you it embeds you within an environment or a story or a worldview in which you can kind of make sense of things, and then at the same time, or not even at the same time, but at differing times, I guess, it's what causes you to realize, oh shit, I'm like I what I'm doing here is not working. I have to step outside of this frame that I've been embedded into. And yeah, it just seems so kind of weird how it does both things.
Yeah.
It's like
Okay.
a pattern of growth, though, right? Like it both is providing you the incentive to want to keep going, and then also is giving you somewhat of a context such that when you break apart the worldview you were just in, you're not left in a contextless
It's kind of like
existence.
reality is putting us through some sort of behavioral training, or like trying to put us through a flow state of like putting us ever further past our proximal, what is it, bounds, or I don't know the exact term.
Yeah, the proximal
State of
growth
development, I think, or
yeah,
something.
yeah.
All right.
Well, it's interesting. He talks about, that it humiliates you, that it brings you to a state of maximal accommodation while reminding you that you can never become anything beyond a finite being. I was thinking about this, and I don't think I've had that sense of horror at that I'm a finite being, or that I'm flawed, or that
I knew it, Pod. You're an NPC. Don't worry.
No,
Don't worry. We can
but maybe it's that I accept it, though. Like it doesn't. It never. I guess I don't know that it occurred to me that I should be perfect, or that I've lost something by not being perfect. That it seems just I don't. I just, in reflecting on this, like, maybe I'm not remembering, but even when I think about it now, it doesn't fill me with horror that I'm a finite being. I don't know if you guys, do you guys have a sense of horror that you can never be God, so to speak?
It's specific to certain points when I greatly desire a godlike power. And then it is definitely horrifying to not have the power of God. Right? One might imagine if some bad situation, if your kid is in a situation that you cannot help and you are forced to instead let go, then it becomes horrifying that you do not have the power to step in and remove them from that situation or whatever, right? So that's when it occurs to me. It's not like I walk around, well, I do walk around a little bit horrified by it, but it's not overt or conscious usually until the circumstances align such.
Yeah, it's especially acute in cases of losing loved ones, right? Not necessarily even the personal loss of your own consciousness. That seems to be like fundamentally something one cannot consciously model. So you can't even deal with that. But what you can consciously understand is the separation, the discontinued repetition of external patterns for things that you love and care for. Yeah.
It's kind of like, I don't know, at least for me, like whenever you attend a funeral or something like that, it's almost like this funeral is a ritual in which like doesn't really fit within all the other rituals of day-to-day life. It's kind of like this thing that we have to do on occasion just for the sake of the, I guess, the victims of the funeral being the loved ones. But it's something that I don't know, maybe I'm just speaking personally, but I try to, it's not try to ignore, but like we automatically ignore the, I don't know, just the very fact that, okay, you are a continuity of life. And then at some point, you're no longer a continuity of life. You're just some body in a casket somewhere. And then that, just even saying that, I don't know, kind of just, it can't really be comprehended, really. At least not by me. Maybe I'm still too young, maybe, but I don't know. It's
when you're closer to death, like me, you get. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like I still don't think, like, because I've been, I've had grandparents die, and I have the grief, but I don't think I've had that sense of oh my God, why don't I have the power to change things? Like even when my kids are in pain or sick, I say, like, I wish I could make it better, but I don't have a deep anguish about, like, it in that form of why don't I have this power. to just fix it. Like I have the feeling I wish I could, but not in an awful sense, in a horrified sense that I don't. I just say I wish I did, but I don't. But it's interesting. But I don't know. Maybe it means I'm an NPC, or maybe it's how my brain is. But I found that really interesting. But it sounds like it is pretty common.
Well, I would say that you have a very even keel. Like in terms of emotions, you probably don't feel very strong emotions very often, right?
No, I do. I mean, I get. It depends about in analytical situations. No, but I mean, I get frustrated and angry, just like anyone. Just in
Frustration
this
and
type
anger,
of thing.
yeah. Well, I mean, like
Yeah.
sadness, longing. Those
Well,
kinds
it's hard to say, like I have depression, but that's a little bit different.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
You cry
But
at movies, Pod?
I tear up. I tear up. I don't. I don't. Yeah. I don't bawl at movies, but I'll have the little, the welling in the eyes that for
Pod,
emotional
you're
movies.
almost a real boy.
Oh,
I was just thinking, the last time I bawled during a movie was Christopher Nolan's latest one, Dunkirk. Just because I identify, in a way I sort of identified with the character of George, but I don't know if any of you have seen it. But it's
no.
in it. There's this kid that wants to, just because I don't know, he's never done anything with his life. He wants to help the sailors bring back the troops from Versailles. I don't remember the exact. I guess Dunkirk. Yeah, the troops from Dunkirk. And so he, in a spur of the moment, hops onto the boat to go help them. And then on the way there, they find this one soldier that is suffering PTSD and has kind of like retreated somewhat. And he's like ultimately guilt-ridden. Anyway, they get into a fight, and then the PTSD soldier pushes that boy. He falls down some stairs and cracks his head open and dies there on the deck. And his entire life basically has been worthless in a sense. Like it never amounted to anything. And then I don't know, maybe I shouldn't spoil the entirety of Dunkirk, because it is a very powerful moment. Anyway, by the end of it, just the recognition of how lives can be like that. There are lives that are exactly like that, where there's this sort of a dream that the people might have, and they might never get the chance to actually act upon that dream. And just the recognition that that happens in reality is something that I don't know, kind of like,
Do you know how many dreams I've failed
it's a
to?
tremor in my soul.
Yeah, but how many dreams have I failed to enact?
Yeah.
How many
Like
dreams?
I've had the sense of awe and horror. I just haven't had that specific sense of awe and horror. I understand the feeling of awe and horror. Yeah, it's funny. Like, well, I mean, certain conceptions of like the New Testament, conception of hell is a horrific idea, right?
There actually isn't one, but
the
parable.
Sorry, in the
you
New
mean
Testament,
like the description and revelation of like the end times.
I'm talking about
The
like,
parable
for example,
of Eleazar and the beggar is what he's referring to.
Yeah, like Lazarus and the rich man. No, the rich man and Lazarus, the gnashing of teeth. But the rich man and Lazarus. I mean, you have this story of this man who finds himself in hell, unable to leave, and is so desperate to just pass on. He accepts that he's stuck there, but is just so desperate to pass on the message to the rest of his family, to have them not come here because it's such a bad place. He just doesn't want any of his loved ones, I mean, framed in terms of his brothers, to come. The concept of any kind of eternal suffering is horrific. I mean, there can't be anything worse than eternal suffering, if that is, for those who have the conception of hell as eternal suffering. If that is the case, eternal suffering is unimaginable to me. Like there can't be anything worse than eternal suffering. Even minor eternal suffering is unimaginably horrific.
Yeah. So,
No.
I mean, what if we woke up tomorrow and we all had the worst day of our lives tomorrow together, all at the same time? Like the whole world's economy would collapse, right? Everything. Like if everybody just stayed home. If I just
Sure.
like woke up and
Yeah.
like, no, and just went back to bed, everything would collapse.
Yeah,
Like there
that's-
would initiate a chain of reaction that would it would just all tumble just immediately.
Is that what fills you with horror? That conception of everyone just taking the
No,
day
no,
off?
no. I'm saying that is like for human experience, let's call it. Okay. A type of hell on earth that's always just one day away.
Well, remember the hell on earth. Hell on earth, I really like as a concept. And not that I like it, but I think it's a very useful concept, and I think much more useful than I was talking to John about this the other day too.
Yeah.
But remember, hell on earth is a finite type of suffering, whereas the conception of hell that some people at least have is of eternal torment, which is far more horrifying. I mean, hell on earth is horrifying enough, but it pales in comparison to any kind of eternal suffering.
Well, when you say pales in comparison, so I wanted to talk a little bit about why I think maybe that is the case, because the question is, why does suffering exist, and what does it even mean to talk about eternal suffering? Because like, do you equally think that you can imagine what eternal bliss is like? I don't know. Like there are these weird ambiguities when we try to talk about eternals or infinites or anything like that. That this is the okay. All right. So let's bring in awe. This is what we were talking about before. And this is actually I drew it. Did not forget. I brought it back. We excavated it. All right. So as the awe gap grows and a structure needs to be elicited, right? A particular structure grows. The outcome of that growth, the potential outcome of that growth, is a type of new compositional layer on top of the awe, which gives it a new character, right? And this is where you start to divide horror into things, right? So that's why I think awe transforms into different things based on what you're trying to grow out of that structure. Yeah, so hell is growing structures or failing to grow structures, let's say, which integrate with the cosmos in a way that is persistent through time, that also at the same time elicits what we associate with positive emotions and affect and all that, right? And or sorry, I said hell, so it's negative, right? So, and then heaven, right? The heaven conception is if we all woke up tomorrow, just had the best day of our life. And every thought that we had was the perfect thought.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't yell at anyone, and we didn't get impatient, and we were filled with charitable love towards everybody. And on that day, whenever we gathered together, the most brilliant compositional things would just spring to life, and we would build heaven, right? Like we can go different directions on that. And that is what I think is ultimately, so that's the religio socio-cultural level, by the way.
Sure.
You can stop at that analysis, and that is in fact where your brain will stop at its analysis if you want, let's say. That's where it pulls its information stack from. But if you go beyond that and attempt to explain why any of all of that exists in the first place, then you bump into like the numinous, and then you start bumping into a gap in which there is a space to grow, where heaven is way, way, way more possible than it ever could have been if you didn't let that gap be as numinous as it was. Does that make sense?
Although it's funny because it leads me in the opposite direction, that like we have all this machinery, and that's where the suffering comes from. It's a certain quality experience that we don't need to go to the numinous to explain why we have suffering here on earth.
That's on the spectrum, right? So it's the carrot and the stick. I think of it as like, those are the two ways that the hemispheres prefer to respond, by the way. I think you can kind of separate them out into those two ways. And those are the two ways that your parents like to parent, by the way. Like it all kind of stacks on top of itself, but carrot and stick. Yeah. You reach towards food that you desire, things that you love, things you want to put into your belly or make a part of yourself, or you run away. You run away from the creature that's going to kill you. Death. That's it. carrot and stick, carrot and stick, carrot and stick. And we extrapolate from all of that, all of these interactions. You move towards a thing, magnetic attraction. Nick brought this up earlier before. Like the character of God is embedded even in the fabric of electromagnetic impulses. Like these kinds of things are related to the very nature of the intelligibility of the universe and the intelligibility of our mind and the character of God as it interacts with it.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of the thing. Like, sorry, Nick, I'll be quick.
Go ahead.
That we sort of extrapolate outwards the furthest extent to whatever it is that we're kind of like that we're interacting with in our own lives right now. Like, I kind of see that like the different religions that will pop up are very much indicative of the like climate for the people within that religion, like the theological claims that will kind of grow forth from that time period are
The
very
relevance realization.
Yeah. And just like if like even Sam Harris, he'll use kind of a conception of hell in order to build up his moral framework. That like if we can conceive the worst possible suffering for everyone, and then that's what we want to avoid. So that's our framework in which we can support all our moral claims off of, and just trying to avoid them. And I mean, the same sort of thing is kind of happening within theological circles with all this talk of hell. It's like, okay, all you people, you're doing this thing, and if you don't stop doing this thing, you're gonna get hell. Okay, even if it's an elaboration that the preachers are making from the real world into the afterlife, it has a greater, I guess, to it. And that's the thing. Like, it's hard to get people to really know not to do things if the stick isn't big enough. And so if you maybe exaggerate a little bit of how big the stick is, it'll help people to kind of recognize it. Because that's the thing, like, we're trapped within our very individualistic frames. If I'm doing something and it doesn't hurt me specifically, it's easy enough for me to it's all right, I'll keep doing this. It's not hurting me. It's not or even just by accident, like, we'll continue to do it just out of habit or something like that. But if our theological framework is putting our skin in the game, this is where, like, okay, well, now I can't do this. Now I gotta stop gambling, or now I gotta quit watching porn, or whatever.
Then we're talking about potentially the noble lie, right?
You say if as though like there's an alternative, right? Like, that is the truth of the way of things. We are real. We are moral creatures, and we construct the world in a particular way. It's exactly what we're talking about, right? What's the alternative? So again, like consider the next block of space, an empty block with which we fill it with potential. What words are we going to choose? From what numinous space are we filling them?
The metaphor of hell, I think, is actually really useful as a metaphor for your life will be bad now if you don't follow this or that. I mean, I think you lose the non-theist when you say, okay, you're going to suffer forever. I think that the conversation would be more palatable to say, okay, forget about forever. Let's just look at now. How do we make our lives better now? And we can focus on what.
It's paralyzing.
That also comes sort of with the risk of, like, okay, let's make our lives better now. And if that comes at the cost of the people 100 years from now, well, that's all right. That's all right, because we're
I think we could work that in too. I mean, what I mean is, we're not worried.
That's the question.
No, we can. I'm saying what I mean now within the human experience
on ourselves,
within the human experience on Earth, rather than our eternal soul. Right.
Well, okay. Yes. But if you want to have the game of life persist for as long as possible, that is eternity, correct?
Sure, but
so if you're trying to construct rules which are those which shepherd the game of life through eternity, you're looking for the eternal rules, right? And therefore, to coalesce them in descriptive terms around these logical possibilities of these rules will lead to the ultimate destruction of life versus these rules will lead to the ultimate continuance of life. That's what the polar extremes are meant to imply, I think, and that's the reason why those imagistic structures and those kind of antipodal extremes are reached in the imaginations, because people have to make sense of those very real possibilities, right?
Yeah, I mean, the religions haven't really dealt with, at least the texts don't deal with environmental,
But they
global
do,
warming.
but they do. It's just they only did it at the level of the salience landscape they had at the
Maybe
time.
why the religious people, some of the, I mean, a lot of the religious people are sort of the worst in the environment because they feel the earth has
No,
been.
well, it's also the case that because the people who are usually on the environmental protection side are less religious in the explicit sense, they hyper moralize their environmentalism, and then that, like, by
No,
comparison, makes the
yeah, but no,
religious people seem.
but I mean, a lot of
I'm
the
just
people who
saying,
don't
like,
believe in global warming, I think, is because they believe God has given the earth to us. So
but
we're
global
not going to
warming,
have this.
yeah, that's
We're
exactly
not
what I
going to have
mean.
this cataclysm because the planet has been allotted to us, and God wouldn't allot us a planet that's going to blow up.
Right.
Or
That's a
whatever.
perfect example, and I'm glad you brought it up, because the extreme descriptions of global climate religion, which is what it is now, are exactly that, the catastrophic hellscape. Okay, and they're putting 10,000 articles a day on Reddit depicting the Australian wildfires for that exact reason. Every one of those articles saying, "Oh, deny climate now," right? They're doing that exact same thing. It's
Are they
religio.
wrong to do
It's
that?
religio. Okay, right?
Well, I mean, it's also science, but
It's
there's
not science.
more.
It's absolutely not science at all. Okay, it's a weird,
Wait, the
twisted,
global
no,
warming science is
baloney.
not
Yeah,
science.
no, yeah, it's oh yeah. Look, hey, we want to do a podcast on that? I'll do a podcast with you on
Oh,
that.
I'm not that. I'm not attacking global warming.
Okay, well, I am, and I'll walk you through all the baloney. Okay, like all of the baloney. Now, there's a real underlying point which you're right about, which is that we don't pay enough attention to the externalities of all of our systems. That's very, very true. But it is also the case that these religio structures, which have always been employed in religion, are still pre-experientially being employed in the religio of climate catastrophe. That's what I'm saying, and that you can feel the effect for real.
I think the point that Tyler was sort of making a little bit early on was how it, for the people that are explicitly like defending the environment, they're doing so in such a way that is very much exclusionary, I suppose, to the people that are religious. Like, I mean, maybe it's not directly
Wait, how?
correlated.
Oh, okay,
How?
all right. Hold on. Just watch linguistically how this happens. Okay, just walk through this in your own mind if you want. Religious people doing bad stuff to the environment. That's like this weird, vague, like cloud of possibilities. So let's start making sense of it. Let's start sculpting it. What are they doing wrong? Well, in order to make sense of
They're
that, we
having
have to make.
kids.
Yeah, they're having kids. It's so ridiculous that the carbon footprint of each kid is crazy. Stop having kids. This is a real argument, Pod, by the way. That's a real argument that people are making. Stop having kids because of the carbon footprint.
It's a fringe argument, but
It's still a
I
real
mean,
argument.
I'm
I'm just saying that is religio. Okay? That's religio. It doesn't matter. It's like it's an obscene kind of twisted version of science in
no, but look,
religio terms. But all right, look.
but the actual science of climate science, I mean, it's based on experimentation and measurement and
No.
and
No, it's not. No, it's not.
I would actually make just an existential kind of risk analysis where if there is anything at all to the global warming science or climate change science, anything like that, and it has cataclysmic risk associated with if we do nothing, then at least we should invest something,
Yes.
whatever it is that we can, towards
Very much
at
so.
least looking into it to get a better understanding and making precautionary moves.
That's true, but you're also dealing with calculating that actual risk is almost impossible because you have combinatorial explosiveness. So
Yeah.
we can't
Or
predict the future if burning a bunch of fossil fuels right now is what enables humanity to grow quick enough to deal with an existential threat that is coming, then turning back away from our excessive use of energy could very well spell our doom. So you end up in weird, redundant things
Exactly
where you
right.
can't. My philosophy is
yeah.
instead of turn around and look backwards, it's like use this huge burst of energy to keep pushing forward. Right.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, I think
use
it's
the
technology
technological
that's going to
growth.
save us anyway. It's figuring out a technological solution rather than, I mean,
Okay, see
affecting our
that
behavior
okay,
is a lot harder.
listen to the metaphorical language that you just used in the Religio. It is the technology that will save us. It's the freaking Religio, man.
Yeah, no, listen. Hold on. I've heard this a lot. Listen,
I'm just saying, if we return to a
have a
feudalistic
language.
lifestyle, our
No,
carbon
listen,
footprint
guys.
would be pretty small.
We exist in a society
Mhm.
that has this language out there. So of
I know.
course we're going to use religious metaphors. Although I wasn't using
No,
save
not
in
of
that
course.
sense.
Yeah, not of course. The very feeling that you need to be saved, that is an embedded aspect of what it is for you to consider
No,
structures in
but
the
I
world
wasn't
and what they're
talking
doing.
about being saved in obviously in the religious sense. I was talking about being
No,
saved from
okay,
whatever
well,
catastrophe is coming.
the religious sense is abstractions that are built up off of the very real sense, right?
Sure, but I'm fine. Like I'm fine with religion as metaphor. See all
Now,
these
all
things we're
thought is
talking.
metaphor. That's what I mean before.
No,
All thought is metaphor.
right, but
Some metaphors map well onto our environment, though.
yeah, a Christian will believe that that it's not just metaphorically being saved; that literally you're saved and going to heaven, where you'll sit at the foot of God.
The Christians
That's
believe
not
that their
just
sets of
metaphor.
behaviors produce a game which is eternal.
No, the, the New Testament has a specific test of belief in that Jesus died for our sins and
I know. It's ridiculous.
and
I know.
that it leads
I get
to
it.
salvation. Like this is it's not just metaphor.
I
The
know it's
metaphorical
crazy. It's
language.
crazy. All those people are totally nuts. I get it. I totally
I'm
get
not
it.
talking about no. I'm not
No,
talking
no.
about them being nuts. I'm saying they're not talking about a metaphor there. They may be using some
And
metaphorical
if
language,
that's the
but they're
case, if
describing
they're not,
something
yeah, I know.
that they
If they're
think is real.
and if they're talking about it as though it's real, they're just nuts, right?
No, I haven't said nuts at all.
Well, I'm trying to get just one step further. I'm kidding, right? I'm not like really.
No. But what I mean is, we can say all words are metaphors, sure, but sometimes, but it's designed. A metaphor is designed to impart information. Still,
No, I'm saying okay. I mean, from a broader perspective, like to put a finer point on it, when I say that Christians are telling a story, and they are attaching a set of rules to that story that is designed to enact a game of life that wants to be played forever. Correct?
Yes, but but
Okay.
but
So
they
what I'm
also think
saying
they're
is,
really, but you're downplaying. I think that they also think they are really going to
oh,
a
see right
real
there.
place.
Stop right. No. Okay, there it is again. There it is. Downplaying, and you're saying it as though, aha, they have a thing that I need to downplay from, right?
That they have a belief that you seem to be downplaying. Yes.
That I seem to be down, like I'm like again, like I'm shying away from, like I
I'm
don't want
saying
them to have, because it's
no
crazy.
no
It's crazy for them to
that
believe
that that the way you seem to be talking about all this
Yeah.
is sort of the way I see it, is sort of metaphorical, is sort of recognizing patterns.
Right.
But a lot of
All
people
thought is metaphor. I'll say it again.
no, but a lot of
Yeah.
people think of it as more than just metaphor, that there's a real place called heaven where they are going to meet a real God and praise him forever, and live in paradise
Mhm.
forever.
Right.
That they, not their progeny, not their ancestors,
Mhm.
not their ancestors, the opposite of ancestors, whatever.
Yeah.
Their
Descendants.
heirs, I guess.
And that's
Descendants.
crazy. It's crazy to think that, right?
I'm looking forward to be plugged out of the
No, I don't
Matrix.
think. I actually don't think it's crazy to think that. I think it's actually. I think it's
It's
a
just
normal thought that
mistaken.
can
So
pop
it's
into a
not
head.
something we need to downplay then?
I'm saying your language was downplaying it.
I'm not trying to look at me. Like I'm taking it head on. I'm not downplaying anything.
No, but I'm saying you were discussing it as a metaphor.
I'm trying to point out that there's a very particular set of languages and perspectives that's taken towards certain kinds of beliefs because it's depicted as a kind of set of nonsense beliefs that you can't believe in because surely it couldn't be that way. Surely it
no,
couldn't be the case that we have immortal souls, right?
No, I don't say it like that. I say it like I don't think there's sufficient.
Well, no,
evidence for
sufficient
that.
evidence. Well, yeah, that's again like Sam Harris would say it, surely, right? So like, but there's
I mean, it's still a normative claim because sufficiency is based within like what we consider of sufficient of good enough grounds. Like we don't have good enough evidence.
Right. I would say I don't have
We're
good
not
enough
going to
grounds to
accept-
believe it.
Okay, so I want to throw out an analogy because all thoughts an analogy and also right. So
Nick has had like a couple points he's wanted to bring up here.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, Nick's a big boy. He can come and swing it.
I can force my way in if I need to,
Yeah.
but I think maybe what's going on here is you have Pod. You seem to be you're responding to perhaps. So what's a good way to say it? There's like a caricature of something that is true, and that doesn't make it not true, but it does make it more cartoonish. Right? Does that make any sense? So I think
the character of what is true.
What do you mean
doesn't
by
make it not
caricature? Like a simplification of something that's true?
yes, a reification, almost a condensed version that, because it's so condensed, it seems easy to reject or easy to I don't know. If you look deeply into theology, it doesn't operate on the level of just like, let's go to the shiny place with the big bearded guy and we'll all be in.
No, I'm simplifying, although that is I mean, I've read at least a good chunk of
and
the
I'm
Testament,
saying there are
it's
people
in there very, very
I'm
directly,
saying,
right? Like, yeah.
Sure. Well, yeah. I'm saying that basically people forming that reification of it doesn't mean it is not true, but it does mean that it's reified, right?
Sure.
So it's like you have a cartoonish representation of a real thing. The cartoonish representation does not represent the real thing, but it
sure. No, but I like when I think
a picture of an apple is still a picture of
when I
it's
think
an
of
apple.
the Christian hell as I've read it in the Bible, I think of it no more. I don't think of it as demons with pitchforks. I think of it as described as eternal torment.
Sure.
I break it down to that. Whatever it is, it's eternal.
Funny,
it's
like,
presented as eternal torment.
Yeah.
Hell is,
And I have theological arguments for why and how that arises. I just don't think they fit in the conversation because it's not really the level the conversation's happening.
Oh no, we started by example of horror, and I was saying that the concept of eternal torment to me
and I think
is a horrific
truly
concept.
the most disturbing or horrific element of that thought of eternal torment has to do with the inability to change, the inability to adapt and rise up out of eternal torment.
Well, except that the at least Lazarus and the rich man says you can't. Now, whether or not that's true or not is another thing. But that story in the New Testament says you cannot leave hell. You cannot cross the river, whatever it is.
The one unforgivable sin is to blaspheme the Holy Spirit, right? So there's a connection here. If you wanted to go down this path of understanding it, that right, one form of what hell is and the lake of fire is that it is agapic love, and out of our rejection or inability to we turn awe into awful.
Yes.
Right, we're stuck permanently getting destroyed by the love of God, as opposed to growing into it. So that's one way to parse it.
But why would it, okay? But theologically, why would anybody ever? Why would it ever be permanent necessarily?
Again, what if we woke up
your
tomorrow?
Own self?
Yeah. What if we woke up tomorrow and at the sociological level, everyone had a bad day? right? And the world ended, and that's game over, man, and that's hell. Or what if tomorrow everybody died except for a very small set of like totally demented individuals, and all they did was torture each other
But
until
that,
those
but,
people died, and that was hell. And you know, like,
but
so
that's not. None of that's. None of that is eternal.
if the game cannot continue, that's a kind of
But the
The
suffering
game
doesn't
by
go on
definition
forever.
is
kind of-
crystallized.
it's kind of a convergence ending. Like
But the
it's
suffering doesn't go on past that moment.
Sort of. Okay, so when you try to, again, this is what John was doing earlier, when you try to envision the death of a dream, the total collapse of all potential, you have a feeling inside you that that is wrong, that there's something wrong to that, right? What is that? What's going on there? Like
But that feeling by definition
Mhm.
is finite. We don't have that feeling forever. We have a feeling for a certain period of
Okay,
time.
so if you and I, and the game of human life has been going on for quite some time, we kind of collectively organize these dreams and visions of the future about whether or not it could be good or bad. The total amount, the total sum of that, like how do we start to depict that? How do we start to get a sense of what the scale of that thing is? And if this universe which we find ourselves within is truly eternal, if the game of life is eternal, which we have no reason to doubt, right? If that's the case, what are we playing with? What scales of responsibility for the visions that we have of the future are we playing with? Are they eternal?
Well, first, I mean,
If you had a button in front of you that blew up all of the nukes in the world at once,
Mhm.
right now, what vision should I be planting in Pod's head?
This is kind of like what I was bringing up earlier, Brett, that there is a difference because there are the differences in metaphysical worldviews. There is going to be a difference in the moralities of the secular and of the Christian. Like if you have the belief that consciousness doesn't end upon death, oh no, now you got to do all these other precautionary actions in order to make sure that when you die, you're not going to be in the same state of suffering that you were in prior to that. Or other reason, like you have to do all these extraneous things, whereas if consciousness is an emergent product to integrated information into a material body or something like that, then there's no really fear for their, like you don't have to do anything extra, like okay, life was sort of shit for 50 or some odd years, now I'm dead, at least that's
sure.
over with.
Listen, there are some practical differences, though. I think you know, I mean, listen, there's enough. I think the differences in practice of how religious people and non-religious people act are smaller than are led to believe. I mean,
Sure.
remember the percentage of
That's a good point. Like a lot of
non-religious
people
people are tiny, and the percentage of miserable people are large. So most of those miserable people are still religious, right? So you know,
yeah. At least they got something going for them though on the back end.
that's right. But no, I get the Bible and these religions as these myths that recognize these patterns, and I grasp that. It's when we push it beyond into that ontological reality, and honestly, I don't get where you're coming from, Tyler, because I hear you presenting it in these mythological pattern recognizing things.
Yep.
But that's a separate process from
accepting
the implications
something which is
post-death, for
so
example.
hard to believe. I know it's so hard to believe. No evidence for it.
No, but it's not what I mean. I mean,
I think he's
talk about it in one format, it doesn't translate to the other format.
right. Yeah, Brett's problem, or at least point of clarification, point of position, it is to do with the ontological reality of consciousness existing after death. And so by continuing to use sort of the metaphorical language of like life does continue, but it can be the way you're kind of phrasing it, Tyler, is life continues for other people,
right?
But not necessarily for the individual being that it does all the actions.
No, but I'm also questioning him about whether or not he thinks that other set of beliefs is crazy, right?
They're also synchronous, which I think is Tyler's point, that if you are supposing that your
Right.
life continues eternally, you're also playing a game where your descendants succeed better.
Precisely one and the same. Yep.
And that's kind of like even my point. Like even as a noble lie, it can perform a function. So like
I
say
didn't say I considered it a noble lie.
yeah, I'll go ahead and that's not to say
See,
that
'cause
it
I'm
is a lie.
crazy.
It's just used for functionalist reasons. I'll at least go out on a limb that part. And it can be done so in a way in which the person would still accept it. So if you like say I have a gambling problem, something like that, and I recognize I have a problem. I want to get rid of this problem. But I'm a mere mortal being that likes gambling. I like the feeling of gambling. It's very fun. But I know if I continue to gamble, it's going to tear my life apart. It's going to tear my wife and kids away from me. And so I've got to do something to kind of fix this problem for me. And recognizing that I need to update my behaviors such that they're not continuing in the same state I've fallen into, this fallen state of habits and repeated patterns. I have to adopt some sort of new outlook. And this is, I guess, like, or maybe like it doesn't even have to be a noble lie, but at least
this is
a
good.
broader outlook than the one I have in mind. So like right now, my way of thinking is, okay, I want to be happy tonight. And so what can I do to make myself happy tonight? Oh, I can go gamble. But by making myself happy tonight, that's making my family not happy over the next, 10 months or something like that. And
or
so
myself not happy.
adopting that's included within it. And so by having a broader understanding of the self, for one reason, not for one point, not as simply what exists now in this present moment, but also what extends now into the future, into the uncertain future as well as also considering not necessarily just the self in this present moment, but also other selves in future moments. These are things that I want to update my behavior. And if the belief or the worldview or reframing of my worldview outlook on life that gets me to update my behaviors in such a way that I want them to be updated, and if the best way of updating those behaviors is some sort of belief in eternal hell and conscious punishment and torture, then maybe I'd like to adopt that belief so that I can update my behaviors in such a way that I know would be most beneficial.
Yeah,
Sure,
and you wouldn't want to trust just your opinion on that circumstance, right, John? I mean, it would be silly if you just thought, well, I'm just going to figure out all on my own. It would be good if you could poll, like, say, all of history, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because, like, I'm the one that's being a shitty husband right now and wasting away all my money. So I know that anything I come up with would not be very useful in getting me out of my situation, but other people.
But again, all the language of this, and I'm with you with all of this. All the language of this is good, but it's separate. It's a separate question from.
Well, the point I was responding to, it was sort of your, like, I don't know, explicitly making the point, but the fact that people are sort of like believing this thing that isn't true from your perspective, it's not true, and it's almost like lying to them, and they're almost like the victims to the lie. And I'm pointing out how it's not necessarily they're victims. Like, it might be that they would still accept it even on the basis of uncertainty.
Sure, no, and I don't think I'm not an anti-theist. I don't think. I mean, I think religions have done some bad things, but they've also done a lot of good things, and including what you're just talking about. I think they've played a pretty strong role, especially in.
Okay, can you separate religions from religio?
Sure. Well, I mean,
when you say the sentence, religions do things. Religions don't do things, right?
Religions are formalized.
Well, I'm using language, but the structures of religion help people do
Those are
things.
just records of the behaviors of people engaged in religio, right?
Yeah. Like I think religions do more than just the theological. I mean, this is what Vervaeke's talked about the whole time, that religion.
Wait,
I
okay,
mean,
wait. So what do you mean when you say more than theological?
so more than just, is God real? Is there really a heaven? Is there really a hell? Is there Satan? Is there whatever, in the other religions? It is doing more than just providing sort of a foundational myth of
Mhm.
of humanity. It is providing rituals that help, like Vervaeke says, it's serious play. It's providing
Structuralizing a
structure.
person within a community and a
Yeah,
social
yeah,
reality.
community. It helps people support each other.
Got
It
the
helps people
practical,
live and work with
psychological
one
benefits.
another.
Yeah.
Yeah. So religions are doing more than saving souls, for example, like in a literal sense
So
of,
I'll
of
say it
being
one more
saved.
time though. What do you mean when you say religions are doing something?
Meaning the structure of religion helps people achieve these good results.
Like the
Or is it that the
psychotechnology.
humans are just
Right.
building structures and they leave a history behind of what they did?
No, but the religion is a set of
Mhm.
psychotechnologies, say, and stories
But who built the
that
religion?
people.
So then it's just the people, right? The religions aren't doing anything. It's just people doing
No,
things.
I'm using a metaphor here when
Well, I know I get
I'm
that,
not
but I
talking
think
literally.
I know
It's the
why, but
people doing things, but the structure of religion
I
helps
no no no. I
people
think this
do
is a
these
really
things.
important point though, because this is where this is how you see the people playing the language games. This is the kinds of topics that get brought up. So like when Sam Harris says we need to get rid of religion because religion does these things, you have to get rid of the people that practice the religion because you can't get rid of religion. You can
No, no,
only
no,
get
no.
rid
You
of
don't have. You have to get rid of the practices that these people.
you could get rid of like the literature, let's say, right? You could destroy the literature, but um
I mean, what I like with what
oh yeah.
John Vervaeke's project seems to be is identifying, all the parts of religion that have done these good things,
Mhm.
and sort of removing it from, say, the theological aspect of it, and trying to isolate these practices, these psychotechnologies that religions have been really focused, the people involved in these religions have been focused on developing,
Right.
and doing it in a more secular way. That's showing that we don't have to believe the theology to have the benefit of all the positive aspects of religions.
And I would say that's I would agree with almost everything you said, except you can just phrase it in a different way and it's just as true that they believe all the same things and they're just using different words.
That theists and non-theists believe all the
Mm.
same thing using different.
They
Well, I mean,
their behaviors and structures and religio content and all of that, they're just using different synonyms and antonyms.
what I would say is, I don't know if I quite go with that, but what I say is we have far more similar views and beliefs than it seems, because we use different language. That I do think there are some real differences in our beliefs,
Mhm.
but
Like I could
but
go to a physics convention and I would have to be a part of the physics religion in order to converse with them, right?
uh,
And any gods that we discuss would have to be in terms of like physics.
yeah, I mean, I think, again, I mean, you can draw some parallels, but then there's some differences as well. I don't really care much of, like, is this a religion or is that a religion? um uh, I'm talking about the specific beliefs of the. I
It's
think,
all cults.
It's
no,
all
yeah, no, it is. I mean, I think we can put aside.
I've been trying to get my liver cells to leave the cult of the liver for a long
Yeah.
time, but they just
Yeah.
won't do it.
I don't know if Brett knows your whole backstory on cults there, Nick. So
Oh yeah.
No, I don't think I do. Were you in a cult?
Inside joke.
Oh, okay. All
Just
A
right.
couple, a few, four.
Four?
I shopped around.
Yeah, no, I mean, part of my point has been that we have far more in common than we have differences, and that, like,
That's exactly
one
what
of
I
the,
just said. Yeah.
right, but one of the things, and this is why I'm sort of trying to de-theologize some of this, that if you put aside just the theology, no, but listen. If you put aside the theology
Mm-hmm.
masks how much we have in common.
No. That's what I mean. The words that you're associating underneath the category of theology, whatever that happens to be, are still being employed in different categories with different linguistic structures, exactly the same phenomena, epiphenomena, interrelationships, frameworks, all that stuff has to exist. You have to make sense of reality.
Right. But people think we're fundamentally different because we have a belief in God or we don't.
Well, people get upset about it. I understand that. And they kill each other over it even.
Right.
I think that's ridiculous.
And because we have a perception that this belief in God
is dramatically different for someone else because they call him Allah. Or dramatically different for someone else because they call him vegan spaghetti monster. Or dramatically different for someone else because they call it no God, me, ego,
and
whatever.
My point, similarly, I think we may be saying more of the same thing than
totally.
It seems.
Yeah. I just want what I want to do, hopefully, is get to a point where we don't even need to try to distinguish these these different structures that we're imputing badness to without directly claiming the badness, right? Something like that.
Right. And the way I'm framing it, I think, is can we
There's
put
safety
aside
and secularity is how you're framing it.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, there's safety and secularity.
Yeah, you don't have to go out on any weird limbs, right?
There's also safety and abundance too. So like when we're not in competition over resources, then these distinctions don't seem so meaningful. But when it is the case that there's very little for everyone, then it's time to tribe up.
I mean, we have the luxury of. I mean, anti-tribalism is one of my things too. So, but that's a whole.
You must live in a very prosperous society there. But,
no, but
nice social welfare system.
That's true. Or rather, I think that but by working together, we're gonna do better with getting resources than
absolutely.
We can't all afford to have your petty bourgeoisie agnosticism or something.
No, some of us have to work for a living.
But
some of us have to work in the foxholes, man. We got to get dirty with God. You know what I'm saying?
That's something that maybe we can talk about it at some point, because that seems like I think you watched the video recently by Paul Vanderklay of Why I'm Still a Christian. Is there's a not necessarily a cutoff point, but there is something that should be addressed by, let's say, Vervaeke, in that there is, a cognitive there is a cognitive distinction between the people of the likes of Sam Harris and the people of, say, Freddie from the Freddie and Paul show, or just homeless people. There's a lot of people out there that live rough lives, and they need some sort of worldview in which their suffering can be meaningful. And if Vervaeke's religion that's not a religion can satisfy those needs, then all the best to him, because that will fulfill a role that has kind of struck the modern world after the death of God.
Right. And I think there are some people who would say, some religious people who would say, for example, not all the best to him. Right. I think that all the best to him is exactly what I want to encourage. And for secular people to say, just because they have religion, you know what? Okay, yes, they have this belief in God, but that's okay. Like, that's not so bad if they have all these other positive aspects from their religion too. And maybe we can downplay the and once we have that understanding, maybe we can. I mean, I think regardless of whether the God exists or not, I mean, religions have done bad things, and so have secular institutions. We can then focus on reducing the bad and enhancing the good, but working together in doing so, rather than just saying we have these, we're just at war with each other.
Yep. Yeah. And there are ways in which, even with tribal biases, we can work together with opposing tribes in some sense.
And the more we understand each other, the less we see the other tribe as them, and we see them more like us, I think. And that's why Vanderklay and Vervaeke can have amazing conversations, even though they disagree on this fundamental question of whether God exists. But they can have amazing relationship and productive discussions.
Maybe not understand. I don't know. Maybe you're using understand in a more colloquial sense, because a lot of like extreme apologists have to kind of build up this understanding for the opposing team, and they have a very strong understanding, but it's done in the service of
but
empathy or something along that line.
I think
I don't know
insofar
that
as we can identify with the other people, then we can see, or I guess that's
like
just saying the
when
same
they
thing.
understand it, like so often when I see each side psychoanalyzing the other, it's a caricature of the other, and I don't think they really are understanding one another. I don't think they really are listening to one another. I don't think they're trying to get past the language differences. Like you said, Tyler, we have different languages, but often that masks, I think, that we have more similar beliefs than we think, because we use a different grammar.
Well, no, I've spent much of my life trying to pick up the languages and grammars of almost every field of study that I find interesting, which is a lot of them. Okay. So like all over the place, right? Like, and that's just the nature of it. So that's what my brain just loves doing, is finding similarities and differences and making sense.
Right. But I think you're more open than most people.
Very much so.
Yes. I mean, and really the four of us are. That's why we're having this conversation.
And in fact, if I were like, okay, so I'm deeply embedded in Religio and in religious structure. I attend church each week. I deal directly with people that have very conservative linguistic structures, right? Their vocabulary cannot stray to something like relevance realization without feeling an intense aura of disgust, right? It's not awesome, it's awful.
That's right. Just saying, we're gonna wrap it up soon.
Yeah, we definitely. Yeah, John put something in the comments a while ago. We should definitely. All right. So final point though really is this: that with the shared language that we have here, right? Religio, religious, secular, whatever, right? From this shared vocabulary and linguistic space, we should do our best to build a future that is meaningful and reduces suffering, and that we believe is possible to be built, right? All those things kind of conjoining together. And that feels perfectly good and true and right, irrespective of what you would call like the theological aspects of things, right? That it seems like playing at that layer is truthful enough that you don't have to really dig into the deeper layers. Does that seem right? Does that seem like the cooperative aspects of communal building and envisioning of the future can exist without attacking, say, like the underpinnings of what people consider to be a theological layer?
Yeah, that we can work and live together and accept that we have some differences, but recognize that we're all in it together.
I like Vervaeke's serious play as well, because I don't like the idea of sterilizing conversation or people in the attempt to stay in safe zones of cooperation. But if we can like play with the contexts around which we have disagreements and turn it into something that is enjoyable to engage in, then you start getting, a basketball game is competitive, but it's also a lot of fun. And that's a much more preferable form than a war.
Right.
Like even like speaking in tongues seems much less ridiculous when you think of it as an example of serious play. So I think this Vervaekean idea of serious play can really can make non-theists less prejudiced towards the rituals of many religious people.
Yeah, and that's something I've noticed about these kinds of conversations too. It's directly related to the tool that you employ in terms of the carrot and the stick. And that's related to, and I want to pull in some of the religious language that is overlapping with Vervaeke, and that's the agapic orientation that you can have towards a method of pulling someone out of the position that they have and including them into yours. This exacting process of synthesizing and making sense of this kind of Hegelian dialectical opposing process. It's always circling around
And
what
that might be filial as well. We talk about agape, but filial love, I think, is just as like agape without filial love, I think, can be tyrannical. The filial love is important. The brotherly
so
love is important.
like the structures you have to build on top of that orientation towards encompassing and bringing in, which is the agapic orientation. I think the structures you build on top of that end up giving more characters to this kind of love orientation, and so that's where you find like
it's tricky too. I like, again, Vervaeke's idea or definition of agapic love is loving into being.
Yeah, exactly that. So that's the reason why
I think we should avoid, then, perhaps not necessarily avoid, but confined to proper circumstances, eros, which is more of consuming the other into your worldview. That can form a perhaps what you're highlighting, Pod, with a tyrannical love, right?
Yeah.
Where
also
you're not allowing them to be a being. You're turning.
Well, the agapic love, I was thinking, like, is the love of a parent, and I tell my children what to do. It's not necessarily democracy.
Sure,
agapic love is not necessarily a democracy. It's the I know what's good for you, and I'm going to help you do it, whether or not you think it's good for you, which can again lead to which is often what the basis.
So that
which I like. Storge is the other word for that type of love. And
Storge, I haven't heard that one.
Storge. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Worth looking up. I don't know when it was introduced. I know it's based on a Greek word, but it's usually the four are brought
Familial
up.
Familial love refers to the natural instinctual affection, such as love of a parent towards offspring, and vice versa. In social psychology, another term for love between good friends is philia.
So what I like about that is that it pushes agape into a more specific role, which I think Vervaeke covered well with the loving into being. But also in theological terms, the love of God for man and the love of man for God, which has aspects of that storge, but it's got something totally other going on as well.
Yeah. But on that note, I think maybe we should bring this to this is a really great conversation.
Yeah, that was
covered a lot of bases. Yeah. That was good. And John, you were sort of getting a little disenchanted, I think, with Vervaeke. Is this conversation brought it back at all, or
for sure. Yeah. And I had heard I listened to a couple of his conversations with like Pajot and Vanderklay again, and he mentions that from 30 to 36 was sort of probably a harder for people to probably go through. So I'm feeling like it's not all going to be this kind of I don't know, not treacherous, but I don't know.
Yeah. So 33 took me hours to get through because I just had to stop every few minutes. I like re-listen and like you fit so much in there. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot to it, and it's hard to include it into your practical framework. For like a lot of the other stuff, I already had this interest in philosophy and things like that, and where that interest doesn't really match with the subject matter, it's kind of hard to feel as invigorated through his lectures. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it because I
think we're caught up with where I think we're now officially past where I had watched up to, so I will be watching fresh with you guys.
Oh, nice.
Oh, great.
And now all of his lectures are out, so I know I mentioned maybe like speed running through the rest of them just to kind of get an idea for where we were going, and I might do that. I don't know, I've got so many other things that I listen to back into, so. But all right, thanks everybody for listening. Thank you all, Nicholas, Tyler, Brett, for joining in for this. Sorry I was kind of off and away. I'm working off of a laptop here and head food I had to get rid of, but it was very enjoyable for me, and I'm glad you all three got to kind of get more I don't know, get out there a lot more.
We'll
Nick, you gotta speak
exercise
up a
some
lot more.
form
You
of
let
Greek love and forgive you.
you let Tyler just steer the conversations everywhere. But no, we like it.
I'm not a super direct. I like being reactive in conversations. Sometimes
I
I'll
don't know
play a
what I
more
do.
slightly
just-
directive role. But...
All right. Well,
it's a
thanks,
really good
everybody.
discussion. Yeah, thanks
Yeah.
everyone. Have a great night.
And everybody go check out Brett's channel because
Yes.
we've got some conversations on free will over there with Matthew.
Gotta watch the latest.
Yeah, I know you've got some future plans going on as well. So
Yeah, I just got to get off my ass and do it.
Wait.
All right.
Are you standing when you record? No.
Good night, everybody.
Don't
Good night.
end on that. That was a terrible joke.